You push back the linen and sit up slowly, feeling the mat give slightly beneath your weight. The floor beneath is packed earth, cool against the soles of your feet, smoothed over many seasons. You stand and reach for the simple kilt of undyed linen that hangs from a wooden peg driven into the mud brick wall, its texture familiar and soft. You wrap it around your waist and tie the knot at your hip without thought, a series of motions repeated so many thousands of times that they belong to your hands alone. The air in the house is dry and smells of the bread baked the day before, a faint trace of emmer flour that lingers near the hearth in the next room. You do not eat yet, that will come later, after the first work is done. You move to a low shelf carved into the wall, where your scribble kit waits in the darkness. Your fingers find the wooden palette first, a smooth rectangular board of acacia wood with a shallow groove for holding the dried ink cakes and a longer slot for the reed pens. You trace the edge of it, feeling the slight indent where your thumb has worn the wood over years of use. The cakes of ink are hard and dry, one of black carbon and one of red ochre, each sitting in its own small depression. The reed pens are there too, a small bundle of them, their ends cut at precise angles trimmed by your own hand the day before. You gather these things and tuck them into a simple linen-carrying cloth, folding the fabric over twice to keep them secure. Along with them you place a small clay water flask, its surface cool and slightly rough, filled the previous evening from the household jar. The weight of the bundle settles into your palm, a familiar anchor. You slip on a pair of sandals made from twisted papyrus reeds, their soles worn thin but still serviceable. The straps pass between your toes and around your ankles, and you tighten them with a practiced tug. The house around you is silent. Your family still asleep in the other room, and you move without a sound through the central space, past the low hearth and the grinding stone, toward the outer door. It is a simple wooden frame hung with a reed mat, and you pull it aside carefully so that it does not scrape against the packed earth floor. The outside air touches your face cooler than inside, carrying the deep quiet of a city that has not yet woken. You step out into the narrow street, and the darkness wraps around you like a second garment. The sky above is a deep velvet blue, not yet touched by the grey light of dawn. The stars are still out, thousands of small white points scattered across the great dome of the sky, and you pause for a moment to let your eyes adjust. The houses on either side are low and square, made of the same mud brick that forms your own home, their flat roofs silhouetted against the starlight. No lamps burn in the doorways, no smoke rises from the chimneys. The street stretches away to your left and right, a ribbon of packed earth and stone that runs between the quiet buildings, and you turn to the left, beginning your daily walk toward the river. Your sandals make a soft, rhythmic sound on the ground, a quiet brushing that follows you as you walk. The street is empty, and your footsteps are the only noise, a slow and steady measure in the stillness. You pass the bakery, its domed clay oven a dark shape against the wall, the long wooden paddle that the baker uses resting against the doorframe. No fire glows from within, but the smell of old ash and burnt grain clings to the air around it, a ghost of yesterday's baking. Further on, you pass the workshop of a sandal maker, the strips of leather and papyrus hanging from a line outside motionless in the still air. Everything is closed, waiting. The city holds its breath before the day begins. You walk without hurry, your legs finding their own pace, the path so well known that your feet could follow it even if the stars were hidden. The street bends slightly to the right, and you come to a broader avenue that leads toward the river. Here the surface is paved with flat stones worn smooth by countless feet and the wheels of carts, and your sandals make a different sound on the stone, a light tap that echoes faintly off the walls. To your left, a narrow alley disappears into shadow, and from somewhere deep within it comes the low, sleepy murmur of a voice. Maybe someone else rising early, though you do not see anyone. You continue on, the bundle with your palette and pens held against your side. The river reveals itself to you not as a sudden sight, but as a gradual change in the texture of the world. First, the air becomes cooler, and you feel a soft breath of wind that carries a richer scent, the smell of water and mud, and the green things that grow along the banks. The stars begin to fade just slightly in the east, the black of the sky thinning into a deep, muted blue that spreads slowly upward. The sounds of the city remain absent, but now you can hear something else. A faint lapping, the gentle movement of the river against its banks. A sound so constant and so ancient that it seems woven into the silence itself. You reach the end of the avenue, and there, beyond the last row of houses and the date palms that stand like silent sentinels, is the Nile. The river is a broad ribbon of darkness, darker even than the sky, its surface smooth and glinting faintly where the last starlight catches the slow-moving water. A heavy mist hangs just above the surface, a low blanket of white that shifts and curls with the current, softening the far shore into a shadowy line. A few small fishing boats are moored near the bank, their hulls simple curves of wood tied with rope, motionless on the black water. Nothing moves on the river yet. No sails, no oars, only the endless, quiet flow from south to north. You do not go down to the water's edge today. Your path turns north, parallel to the river, following a track that runs along the higher ground above the floodplain. This track is made of packed silt and gravel, wide enough for a cart, and it leads directly to the granary complex that stands at the northern edge of the city. Along one side of the track runs a low wall made of mud brick, marking the boundary of a temple estate. The wall is old, its surface cracked and weathered by many flood seasons, and tufts of dry grass grow from the gaps between the bricks. You walk beside this wall, your left hand occasionally brushing its rough surface, the touch a quiet anchor in the dark. The mist from the river seeps over the land, and you walk through a cool, damp air that settles on your skin and on your linen kilt, leaving a faint moisture. The stars continue to fade, the sky shifting now to a pale, watery grey in the east, while overhead the blue holds on for a little longer. The palm trees along the river bank become more distinct, their fronds a dark, feathery silhouette against the brightening sky. The lapping of the river remains a constant companion, a steady, lulling sound that fills the silence without intruding on it. You pass a field where the stubble of harvested barley still stands in neat rows, the stalks pale and dry, and the smell of earth and cut straw mixes with the river scent. The granary begins to take shape in the distance. At first it is only a darker mass against the dark sky, a solid block that interrupts the flat horizon. As you draw closer, the details emerge slowly, piece by piece. You see the great conical silos first, their shapes like giant clay jars rising from the ground, some of them as high as 3 men. They are made of mud brick and plastered with a smooth coat of clay, and in the dim light they appear almost soft, their curves gentle against the sharp geometry of the surrounding walls. Behind them, the main courtyard wall runs straight and tall, a barrier of brick that encloses the entire complex. The gate is a simple opening in this wall, flanked by 2 stone posts, and above it hangs a heavy wooden lintel. You approach the gate, and the guard who stands there is leaning against one of the stone posts, a spear propped beside him. He is wrapped in a thick cloak against the early morning chill, and his head is nodding, his chin nearly touching his chest. The lamp that burns on a small ledge beside the gate casts a faint orange glow, a single point of warm light in the blue-grey dark. The guard hears your footsteps and lifts his head slowly, blinking, his eyes heavy with sleep. He recognizes you with a small, silent nod, a slight lift of his chin, and you return the gesture without breaking stride. No words are exchanged. He pushes himself away from the post just enough to let you pass, and you step through the gateway into the granary courtyard. Inside the courtyard, the air changes. The mist is thinner here, held at bay by the high walls, and the smell of the river is joined by something else, the dry, dusty scent of stored grain and old earth. The courtyard is vast and open, its floor paved with packed gravel that crunches faintly under your sandals. The silos you saw from outside now rise on either side of you, their domed tops barely visible against the sky. At the base of each silo is a small wooden door, sealed shut with a clay bulla and cord, the mark of the granary official pressed into the still damp clay. You walk past these doors, your footsteps echoing softly in the enclosed space, and you hear the faint stirring of birds up near the tops of the silos, a rustle of wings as they wake. On the far side of the courtyard, opposite the gate, is a long, low building made of the same mud brick. This is the administrative wing, where the offices and the records chamber are located. Its flat roof is supported by a series of wooden columns, and a narrow veranda runs along its front. The veranda is empty, its packed earth floor swept clean. You cross the courtyard diagonally, heading toward a smaller door at the end of this building, a door that is set apart from the main entrance. This is the entrance to the records chamber, your destination. The door is made of thick acacia planks, fitted with a wooden lock that the chief official will open when the day formally begins. For now it remains closed, but there is a small waiting bench beside it, a simple stone slab set against the wall, and you lower yourself onto it, placing your bundle on your lap. Sitting there, you feel the first faint warmth of the day beginning to touch the air. The sky above the courtyard walls is now a soft, pale blue, and the stars have vanished completely. The top of the eastern wall catches the very first ray of sunlight, a thin line of gold that spreads slowly downward, illuminating the rough texture of the bricks. The birds in the silo tops begin to chirp, a quiet, scattered sound that does not break the stillness so much as fill it. The courtyard remains empty, and you are alone with the slow brightening of the world. You rest your hands on the wrapped bundle, feeling the hard shape of the pallet beneath the linen, and you wait in the calm silence for the official to arrive with the day's first tablets. The long, quiet hours of work stretch ahead of you, just as they do every morning, a steady and unchanging rhythm that will carry you through until the lamp is extinguished and the night returns. The stone bench is cool beneath you, its surface worn smooth by the many scribes who have sat here before you over the years, their weight gradually polishing the limestone until it holds a faint sheen that catches the early light. You sit with your bundle resting on your lap, your hands folded loosely over the linen wrapping, and you watch the sunlight spread down the eastern wall of the courtyard. The line of gold moves slowly, as it does every morning, creeping downward brick by brick, revealing the rough texture of the mud plaster and the small cracks that run through it like the veins of a dried leaf. The air around you is still and silent, and the only movement in the courtyard is the slow descent of that light, patient and unhurried, as though the day itself is being measured out in careful increments. You do not wait long. The chief granary official arrives from his own house somewhere beyond the walls, entering through the same gate you passed earlier. He is a heavy-set man with a slow, deliberate walk, his shoulders broad and his arms hanging loosely at his sides. He wears a simple kilt of coarser linen than yours, and his feet are bare, the soles calloused from years of walking on stone and gravel. In his left hand he carries a ring of wooden keys, each one a small cylinder of acacia wood with carved notches along its length, and they clack together softly as he moves. The guard at the gate nods to him with the same sleepy acknowledgment he offered you, and the official returns the nod without speaking, his face set in the calm, neutral expression of a man who has begun this same routine on hundreds of mornings. He crosses the courtyard along the same diagonal path you took, his bare feet making a soft, shuffling sound on the gravel, and as he approaches the low building he raises his eyes to you and gives a small nod of recognition. You stand from the bench, gathering your bundle under one arm, and return the nod. The official steps up to the acacia door and selects one of the keys from the ring, holding it up close to his face to examine the notches, though his fingers already know which one it is by touch alone. He inserts the key into the wooden lock, a simple mechanism of pegs and levers, and turns it slowly, a motion that requires a firm, steady pressure. There is a soft, deep click, and then the door swings inward with a gentle creak of its leather hinges, revealing the darkness beyond. The official steps aside and gestures with a slight tilt of his head, inviting you to enter first. You step across the threshold into the records chamber, and immediately the air changes around you. It is cooler than the courtyard, noticeably so, as though the room has held on to the night's chill and refuses to release it. The darkness is nearly complete, broken only by the faint grey rectangle of the open doorway behind you, which casts a dim glow a few paces into the room. You pause just inside the door, allowing your eyes to begin adjusting, and you breathe in the familiar scent of the chamber. It is a layered smell composed of many things: old papyrus, dry and brittle, stored in rolls on wooden shelves along the walls, cedar oil, used to treat the wooden furniture and keep insects away, and a fine ancient dust that has settled over everything, the accumulated residue of years of quiet work. The official does not follow you inside. His duties lie elsewhere, in the main office where the tally tablets are received and checked. He will bring you those tablets throughout the day one by one, but for now he simply reaches into a niche beside the door and retrieves a small clay lamp that has been left there, its oil spent and its wick charred from the previous night. He hands it to you without a word, and then he turns and walks away, his footsteps receding across the gravel courtyard. You are alone in the chamber. You stand for a moment in the dim light, holding the empty lamp in one hand and your bundle in the other, orienting yourself in the familiar space. The room is small and windowless, its walls made of the same mud brick as the rest of the building, plastered smooth and painted with a thin wash of white that has yellowed with age. The ceiling is low, supported by two wooden beams that run the length of the room, their surfaces darkened by smoke from countless lamps. Against the right wall is a series of wooden shelves, simple planks resting on brick supports, and on these shelves are the scrolls of past tax records, rolled tightly and tied with linen cords, their edges frayed and their surfaces marked with brief labels in faded ink. Against the left wall is a row of large clay storage jars, their mouths sealed with cloth and mud, containing the reserves of oil for the lamps, spare wicks, and other supplies. In the center of the room, directly beneath the space between the two ceiling beams, is your low wooden table. You walk to this table now, your sandals making a soft, dry sound on the packed earth floor. The table is a simple piece of furniture, its surface a single plank of sycamore wood, smoothed by use and stained in places with old ink spills that have seeped into the grain over time. It stands only as high as your knees, designed for a scribe who sits cross-legged on the floor, and beside it is a flat woven reed mat that serves as your seat. You lower your bundle onto the table and place the empty lamp beside it, and then you lower yourself onto the mat, settling into the familiar position with your legs folded beneath you and your back straight. The first task of every day is the lighting of the lamp, a careful and methodical process that you perform with the unhurried attention it deserves. You begin by standing again and crossing to the storage jars along the left wall. The oil jar is the largest of them, a tall, wide-bellied vessel with a narrow neck and a small loop handle near the rim. You lift it with both hands, feeling the weight of the oil shift inside, and you carry it back to your table, setting it down gently on the floor beside your mat. The stopper is a simple wooden plug wrapped in linen, and you work it free with a slow twisting motion, the cloth rasping against the clay. Once it is removed, you set it aside on the tabletop, and the smell of the oil rises from the open neck, a mild, slightly nutty scent that blends with the dry air of the chamber. You pick up the empty lamp now, a small, shallow bowl made of the same reddish-brown pottery as the storage jar, with a pinched spout at one end to hold the wick. The inside of the bowl is blackened from previous flames, the thin layer of soot that comes off on your fingertip when you touch it. You tilt the oil jar carefully, supporting its weight with one hand on the base and the other on the handle, and you pour the oil into the lamp in a slow, thin stream. The liquid is thick and pale gold, moving sluggishly, and it catches the faint light from the doorway with a soft gleam. You fill the bowl to just below the rim, leaving a small space to prevent spillage when the wick is added, and then you set the oil jar upright again, returning the stopper to its place with a firm press. With the lamp filled, you now need a wick. The storage jar beside the oil holds the flax fibers, a loose bundle of them that have been cleaned and combed smooth, their color a pale tan. You reach into the jar and pull out a small tuft, a handful of the long silky strands that slip against each other with a faint rustling sound. You hold the tuft in your left hand and use your right thumb and forefinger to separate a smaller portion, a pinch about the length of your palm. This you begin to roll between your fingertips, twisting the fibers slowly and steadily, applying a gentle, even pressure. The flax twists upon itself, the individual strands binding together into a single cord, and you continue rolling until you have a wick about as thick as the stem of a reed and as long as the distance from the spout to the bottom of the lamp bowl. The process takes time, and you do not rush it. The wick must be uniform, without thin spots that would burn too quickly, or thick spots that would choke the flame. When the wick is ready, you hold it between your thumb and forefinger and lower one end into the oil, letting it sink into the pale liquid. The flax absorbs the oil immediately, darkening as the liquid climbs up the fibers, a slow, visible progression that transforms the pale cord into a deep, golden brown. You fold the wet end over and tuck it into the spout of the lamp, pressing it gently into the pinch of clay so that it sits securely, its tip protruding just beyond the rim. The other end of the wick rests in the oil, where it will draw fuel up through the twisted fibers by the same principle that draws water up through the roots of a plant. Now you need a flame. The courtyard outside contains a small brazier that burns throughout the day and night, a simple metal bowl filled with charcoal embers used by the guards and workers to light their own lamps. You stand again, your knees pressing briefly against the reed mat, and you walk back to the doorway. The sun has risen higher now, and the courtyard is filled with a pale golden light that makes you squint for a moment as you step outside. The brazier is located near the gate, a blackened bronze bowl set on a stone pedestal, and a thin wisp of grey smoke rises from it, twisting upward and disappearing into the morning air. No one else is near it. The courtyard is still mostly empty, though you can hear the distant lowing of an ox from somewhere beyond the walls. Beside the brazier is a stack of long, thin splints made from palm wood, each one about the length of your forearm and split to a fine taper at one end. You select a splint from the pile, holding it by the thicker end, and you lower the taper tip into the heart of the charcoal embers. The embers glow with a deep, pulsing orange, and you watch as the tip of the splint blackens, then glows red at the very edge, and then catches with a tiny, wavering flame that flickers blue at its base and yellow at its peak. You lift the splint carefully, shielding the flame with your cupped hand, as you turn and walk back toward the records chamber. Your footsteps quick, but unhurried, the small fire dancing in the still air. Inside the chamber, you kneel beside your lamp and bring the burning splint close to the oil-soaked wick. The flame touches the flax, and for a heartbeat nothing happens, the fire licking at the fibers without taking hold. Then, with a soft, almost inaudible sound, the wick catches, and a new flame springs into life. It is small at first, a fragile, wavering tongue of fire that flickers and dances, casting shifting shadows across the tabletop and the walls. You withdraw the splint and blow out its flame with a single, gentle breath, setting the now smoking stick aside on the floor to cool. Then you return your attention to the lamp, watching as the new flame steadies itself. The fire burns brighter as the oil flow increases, the flax drawing fuel up from the bowl with a quiet, steady efficiency. The flame grows to the height of your thumb, a teardrop of light that is bright orange at its core and pale yellow at its edges, with a faint blue shimmer where it meets the wick. The light it casts is warm and golden, a pool of illumination that extends across the table, catching the grain of the sycamore wood and the edges of your scribal bundle. Beyond this pool, the corners of the room remain in deep shadow, but the circle of light is enough, a small, private domain where you will spend the hours of the day. You settle back onto your reed mat, crossing your legs and adjusting your kilt so that the fabric does not bunch beneath you. The lamp now burns with a steady, unwavering flame, its light a constant presence that defines the space. You can feel the faint warmth of it on your face, a subtle sensation that will grow more noticeable as the day progresses and the small room holds the heat close. The flame makes almost no sound, just the softest, most intermittent hiss as the oil vaporizes and burns, a whisper so quiet that you must hold your breath to hear it. This quiet is the true companion of your work, a silence deeper than the absence of noise, filled only by the gentle sizzle of the flame and, soon, the faint scratch of your pen on papyrus. Now that the light is ready, you turn your attention to the other tools of your trade. You reach for your bundle on the table and untie the simple knot you made earlier, unfolding the linen cloth to reveal the palette, the reed pens, and the water flask within. The palette is the first thing you pick up, lifting it with both hands and placing it on the table directly in front of you, aligned with the edge of the table so that it sits square and true. The wood is a warm, honeyed brown, polished by the oils of your skin over years of handling, and the shallow groove that holds the ink cakes runs along its length like a tiny dry canal. The black ink cake sits in its depression, a hard, irregular lump of carbonized soot, mixed with gum, and dried to a brittle solid. Beside it, in a smaller depression, is the red ochre cake used for headings and corrections, its surface a deep, dusty rust color. You take the water flask, a small clay vessel shaped like a flattened sphere with a narrow neck, and you remove its stopper, a rolled piece of linen that fits snugly into the opening. You tilt the flask over the groove where the black ink cake sits, allowing a few drops of water to fall onto the hard surface of the ink. The water beads up at first, tiny spheres that tremble with the movement of your hand, and then it settles, spreading slightly as the porous surface of the cake begins to absorb it. You do not add too much. The ink must be mixed to a paste, not a liquid, and it is easier to add more water later than to wait for excess moisture to evaporate. You set the flask aside, restoppering it loosely, and you pick up one of the reed pens. The reed pens are simple things, cut from the tall grasses that grow along the riverbank, their stems dried and hardened until they are light and stiff. Each pen is about the length of your hand, and one end has been cut at a sharp angle with a small knife, forming a flat, chisel-like tip. You select a pen from the bundle and hold it up to the lamp, turning it slowly to inspect the cut. The angle is clean, the edge sharp, and there are no splits in the reed that might cause the ink to flow unevenly. Satisfied, you lay it on the table beside the palette, its tip pointing away from you so that it does not accidentally catch on anything. Now you mix the ink. You take the pen in your right hand, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers, and you use the flat end of the angled tip to grind the moistened ink cake. You work in small circular motions, pressing gently, feeling the hard cake soften and dissolve under the friction. The water darkens immediately, turning from clear to a cloudy grey, and then to a deep, rich black as the carbon particles disperse. A faint, earthy smell rises from the groove, the odour of soot and gum and water combined, a smell as familiar to you as the scent of bread or river mist. You continue grinding until the ink reaches the proper consistency, a smooth, viscous paste that flows only slightly when you lift the pen, forming a slow drip that stretches and then breaks, leaving a glossy sheen on the metal-free wood. You test the ink by dipping the very tip of the pen into the paste and making a small mark on the edge of the palette, a single, short line. The ink flows smoothly, a fine, black stroke that dries almost instantly to a matte finish, and you see that the consistency is perfect, neither too thick to flow nor too thin to hold its shape. You wipe the tip clean with a small scrap of linen that you keep tucked into a fold of your kilt, and then you set the pen down again, ready for the first tablet of the day. The room is now fully prepared. The lamp burns steadily, its flame a small bright sun in the center of the dark chamber, casting its golden circle upon the table where the palette, the pen, and the waiting papyrus scroll rest in silence. The air is warm with the heat of the flame and heavy with the smells of oil, ink, and old wood. Outside, beyond the thick walls, you can hear the faint sounds of the granary coming to life, the creak of an ox cart, the low murmur of workers calling to one another, the thud of a heavy grain sack being dropped onto the courtyard stones. These sounds do not disturb you. They are the background noise of your world, as steady and predictable as the river's flow. You take a fresh scroll of papyrus from the shelf behind you, a roll about the length of your forearm, its surface a pale creamy brown with the faint lines of the pressed strips visible beneath. You untie the cord that binds it and unroll the first portion, laying it flat on the table before you, its top edge weighted down with a smooth river stone that serves as a paperweight. The papyrus is crisp and new, and it makes a faint crackling sound as it flattens under your palm. You smooth it carefully, pressing out the natural curl until it lies perfectly flat and ready to receive the ink. Now there is nothing left to do but wait. The first tally tablet has not yet arrived, but it will come soon, carried in by the chief official with his slow, heavy tread. Until then, you sit in the lamplight, your hands resting loosely on the table, your breathing slow and even, your eyes watching the small, steady flame as it burns. The day stretches out before you, a long, calm river of hours, and you are ready to begin. The sound that announces the beginning of the day's true labor comes not from within the records chamber, but from beyond the courtyard walls, a distant creaking that grows slowly louder, resolving itself into the distinct groan of a heavy wooden cart under load. You hear it first as a faint, rhythmic complaint of axle and wheel, a sound that rises and falls with the unevenness of the track, and then, beneath it, the lower, softer sound of the oxen, a deep, resonant blowing that vibrates through the still morning air. The animals are tired from their walk from the river dock, and their calls carry a note of patient, uncomplaining endurance. The voices of the drivers come next, not words that you can distinguish, but the rise and fall of human speech, calm and unhurried, directing the oxen to turn, to stop, to back up just a little more. The grinding of wooden wheels on the stone paving of the courtyard gate churns through the quiet, and you lift your head slightly, listening as the first cart of the day arrives. You remain seated on your reed mat, your legs crossed and your back straight, the lamp burning steadily before you. The sounds from the courtyard do not break your focus. They are simply a new layer added to the quiet, a signal that the machinery of the granary has begun to turn. You have heard these same sounds on hundreds of mornings, the creak and low and grind, and they settle into your awareness like familiar music. The circle of lamplight on your table holds the palette, the reed pen, and the waiting papyrus scroll, everything in its proper place. You have already mixed the ink to its perfect consistency, a smooth black paste that glistens faintly in the golden light. You have already tested the pen and found it true. Now there is nothing to do but wait for the first tablet to arrive, and that wait is nearly over. The chief granary official's footsteps are distinctive, a slow, heavy tread that presses the gravel of the courtyard into the earth with each step. You hear them approaching, crossing from the direction of the main gate where he has been overseeing the unloading, and you turn your head slightly toward the open doorway of the chamber. The rectangle of light that falls through it has shifted now, moving across the packed earth floor as the sun climbs higher, and it illuminates a broad patch of dust motes suspended in the still air. The official's shadow falls across this patch first, a dark, bulky shape that precedes him into the room, and then he himself appears, ducking his head slightly under the low lintel as he steps inside. In his hands he carries the first clay tally tablet of the day, and he holds it carefully, cradling it in both palms as though it were a vessel filled to the brim. The tablet is a rectangle of sun-dried clay, about the width of his chest, its surface still slightly darker than the edges where the moisture has not yet fully evaporated. The official crosses the small room, with his slow, deliberate walk, his bare feet making soft, shuffling sounds on the packed earth, and when he reaches your table, he lowers himself to one knee and sets the tablet down on the wooden surface beside your lamp, positioning it so that the incised marks catch the light. He does not speak immediately. He looks at you, his tired eyes holding the calm, steady gaze of a man who has done this work for many seasons, and he gestures with a slight movement of his chin toward the tablet. Then he speaks a few words, his voice low and unhurried, explaining the origin of the shipment. This grain has come from a barge that arrived at the river dock before dawn, he says. The barge travelled downstream from a noble's estate in the northern Nome, one of the large agricultural holdings that line the river and send their taxes to the granary by water. The cargo is emmer wheat, the heavy golden grain that forms the backbone of the royal bread supply. The quantity has been pre-measured at the dock by the official stationed there, using the standard Hicat measure, and the tally marks on the tablet record their count. Your task now is to transfer this information from clay to papyrus, creating the permanent record that will be stored in the archives. You nod once, a slow, measured dip of your head, and you reach out to draw the tablet closer to you. The clay is cool and slightly damp to the touch, its surface covered with a dense network of marks made by a stylus while the clay was still soft. You recognize the handwriting of the dock official, a man you have never met but whose hand you would know anywhere, the sharp, angular strokes of his stylus forming the hieratic characters with a practiced efficiency. The marks are arranged in neat rows: the date, the regnal year of the king, the name of the estate, the nome of origin, and then the long repeating columns of numbers that indicate the quantity of grain. Each number is represented by a series of strokes and symbols, the hecad signs and the multiples thereof, arranged in groups of 10 and 100 and 1,000. You read them silently, your lips forming the words without sound, your eyes moving slowly across the rows. The official remains kneeling beside you for a moment longer, watching as you begin your work, and then he pushes himself to his feet with a soft grunt and turns to leave. His footsteps retreat across the room, and the rectangle of light from the doorway flickers as his body passes through it. You are alone again with the lamp and the tablet and the scroll, the familiar silence settling back around you like a cloak. You adjust your position on the reed mat, shifting your weight slightly so that your back remains straight and your shoulders relaxed. The tablet sits before you, its surface a map of information that you must now translate into ink. You have already prepared the papyrus, unrolling the first section and weighting it down with the smooth river stone, but you check it once more, running your palm across its surface to feel the crisp, slightly nubby texture of the pressed strips. The sheet lies flat and true, its top edge aligned with the front of the table, and the pale cream color of it glows warmly in the lamplight. You pick up the reed pen, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers, the way you have held it for years, the angle of the cut tip as natural to your hand as the angle of your own finger joints. Before you write, you take a moment to review the tablet's markings one more time, tracing the lines with the blunt end of the pen. You begin at the top, where the date is inscribed in the standard format, the month of the inundation season, the day of the lunar cycle, the regnal year of the king who sits on the throne. These details form a kind of anchor, fixing the record in time, and you commit them to memory even as you prepare to transcribe them. Below the date is the name of the estate, a sprawling domain that lies in the northern nome, its boundaries marked by ancient sycamore trees and irrigation canals. The name is written with the hieratic characters that represent the sounds of the estate's designation, and you read them slowly, your lips moving again, forming the silent syllables. Next comes the type of grain, emmer wheat, indicated by the stylized symbol of a stalk of grain with its heavy head drooping to one side, and then the numbers, the long columns of tally marks that record the quantity in hecats. You dip the tip of the pen into the ink paste, touching it lightly to the surface so that only the very point is coated. You lift the pen and hold it above the palette for a moment, allowing any excess ink to drip back into the groove, and then you bring it to the papyrus. The first stroke is always the most deliberate, a conscious beginning to the long stream of writing that will follow, and you make it now with slow, even pressure, the horizontal line that begins the date character. The ink flows from the reed onto the fibrous surface, a dark, glossy line that dries almost instantly to a matte black, and you continue the character with the vertical stroke, the curve, the smaller marks that complete the sign. The sound of the pen on the papyrus is a soft, dry scratching, barely audible over the gentle hiss of the lamp, a sound that has become so familiar to you that you no longer consciously hear it. You work through the date, the regnal year, the month, the day, each character formed with the same careful precision. Your hand moves slowly, the motions of the pen guided by a muscle memory that has been built over thousands of repetitions, and you do not rush. Rushing leads to smudged ink, to characters that must be corrected with the red ochre, to a record that is less than perfect. Perfection is not expected. The records are practical documents, not works of art. But you have always taken a quiet pride in the neatness of your columns, the consistency of your hand, and that pride is a small, private thing that you carry with you through the hours of the day. When the date is complete, you move to the name of the estate. The characters here are more complex, involving curves and angles that require you to lift the pen and set it down again multiple times. You form the first character, a bird-like shape with a long sweeping tail that curls up at the end, and then you pause, checking the tablet to confirm the next character. The clay is slightly smudged in one corner, the tip of a sign obscured by a stray fingerprint, and you squint at it for a moment, tilting the tablet so that the lamplight falls across it at a sharper angle. The shadow reveals the faint trace of the original mark, and you nod slightly to yourself, satisfied, before returning to the papyrus. Outside the chamber, the sounds of the granary continue their steady rhythm. You hear the low voices of the workers as they unload the grain sacks from the cart, a murmuring bass note that underlies everything. The sacks are heavy, each one holding a measured amount of emmer, and they land on the courtyard stones with a series of dull, rhythmic thuds. A pause, then another thud. A pause, then another. The workers are moving in a slow, steady procession from the cart to the base of the silos, where the grain will be pulled through the small wooden doors at the top of ladders. You do not watch this process, but you can picture it clearly from years of seeing it. The men with their shoulders bowed under the weight, the dust rising from the sacks in pale clouds, the overseer standing to one side with a tally stick of his own, marking each sack as it passes. All of this is the background to your own work, a parallel world of physical labor that runs alongside your silent, seated task. You finish the estate name and move to the grain type symbol, a simple matter of a few strokes, the vertical stalk, the angled head, the small crosshatches that represent the individual grains. This symbol repeats throughout the records, one of the most common characters in the granary archives, and you can form it almost without looking, your hand moving on its own while your eyes remain fixed on the tablet. The emmer symbol is followed by the quantity, and here the work becomes a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The numbers are written in groups, the Hecat sign repeated again and again, the multiples indicated by additional strokes that cluster around the base character. You write the hundreds first, a long series of nearly identical marks that flow down the column, and then the tens, and then the single units. Each mark is the same as the one before it. Dip the pen, wipe the excess, make the stroke, lift the pen, move to the next space. Dip, wipe, stroke, lift, move. The repetition settles into your body, a calm, meditative cadence that occupies your hands while your mind drifts in a quiet, watchful state. The lamp flame flickers once, a tiny, momentary dance of light that draws your eye. You pause and watch it for a moment, noting that the oil level in the bowl has dropped slightly, the wick still drawing fuel steadily upward. The flame steadies itself again, and you return to the numbers, your pen resuming its slow progress down the column. The tablet contains several columns of these tally marks, each one representing a different sub-measurement of the total shipment, the portion that will go directly to the royal bakeries, the portion that will be set aside for seed grain, the portion that will be stored as emergency reserves. Each column must be recorded separately, and you mark the divisions with a thin, horizontal line drawn across the papyrus, a simple separator that will help the archivist read the scroll later. You reach the end of the first column and set the pen down in its groove on the palette, flexing your fingers to release the slight stiffness that has begun to gather in the joints. You pick up the water flask and take a small sip, the cool liquid soothing your throat, and you replace the stopper before setting it aside. The tablet still holds more information, another column of numbers that you have not yet transcribed, and you take a moment to review it, tracing the marks with your finger. The numbers are accurate as far as you can tell, the tally consistent with the pre-measured amount, and you nod slightly to yourself before picking up the pen once more. You dip the pen, wipe the tip, and begin the second column, the characters forming under your hand with the same steady, unhurried pace. The sounds from the courtyard have changed slightly now. The cart that arrived first has been unloaded, and you hear the drivers coaxing the oxen to turn around, their voices patient and low, the wooden wheels grinding again on the stones. A second cart is arriving, its creaking audible even before it passes through the gate, and the whole cycle of unloading will begin again. This is the rhythm of the granary, an endless cyclical flow of grain from barge to cart to silo, measured and recorded at every step. A vast, slow-moving river of administration that you sit at the center of, your pen the final point where all the measurements converge. The second column takes less time than the first, your hand now fully warm, and the motions coming with even greater ease. You write the last number, the final single Hecat unit, and set the pen down with a soft click on the wooden pallet. The tablet is now fully transcribed, its information transferred from the impermanent clay to the enduring papyrus, and you lean back slightly, rolling your shoulders to ease the tension that has settled between your shoulder blades. The lamp burns steadily, its flame a little shorter now, the oil in the bowl continuing its slow, invisible consumption. You review the papyrus once more, your eyes traveling down the fresh column of ink, checking for any broken characters or accidental blots. The ink has dried completely, its glossy surface now a uniform matte black, and the marks stand out clearly against the pale cream background. Everything is in order, a clean, legible record that can be stored and retrieved when needed. You lift the riverstone paperweight and move it to the side, allowing the papyrus to curl slightly at the edges, though it remains mostly flat from the weight. The tablet, its purpose served, will be returned to the dock officials later, where it will be moistened and smoothed over for reuse. Clay is a patient medium, endlessly recyclable, and the tablet that holds today's tally may hold tomorrow's as well, the old marks erased by a wet palm and a flat stone. You gather the tablet in both hands, its weight solid and cool, and you rise from your mat, your knees pressing briefly against the floor before you stand. You carry the tablet to the doorway and step out into the courtyard, blinking in the bright pale sunlight that has now flooded the open space. The chief official is standing near the second cart, his hands clasped behind his back as he watches the unloading, and you approach him with the tablet held out before you. He turns at the sound of your footsteps, and you hand him the tablet without a word. He takes it, glances at it briefly to confirm that the records have been transferred, and then nods once, a slow, heavy dip of his chin. The transaction is complete. You turn and walk back toward the dim lamplit chamber, the cool shadows enfolding you as you cross the threshold, and you settle back onto your mat to wait for the next tablet, the next column of numbers, the next quiet hour of work. The chief official returns through the doorway of the records chamber with the same slow, heavy tread that carried him out, his footsteps pressing into the packed earth floor in a rhythm you have come to know as well as your own breathing. The rectangle of daylight behind him has shifted again, climbing higher up the opposite wall as the sun continues its steady ascent, and the shadows in the corners of the room have retreated slightly, pushed back by the soft, indirect glow that now fills the courtyard. He carries the second tally tablet of the morning in his hands, a new rectangle of sun-dried clay that is still cool and slightly damp, its surface marked with the sharp, angular impressions of the dock official's stylus. You lift your head as he approaches, and the lamplight catches the tired lines around his eyes, the heavy lids that speak of many early mornings and late evenings spent among the silos. He lowers himself to one knee beside your low table, the motion slow and deliberate, and he sets the tablet down on the wooden surface next to the papyrus scroll, positioning it so that the incised marks catch the golden glow of the flame. The tablet is similar to the first one in its shape and size, a rectangle about as wide as a man's chest and as long as the distance from elbow to fingertip, its edges smoothed by the dock official's palm before the clay fully dried. The official looks at you, his tired eyes meeting yours, and he speaks in a low, unhurried voice. "This shipment," he says, "is from a barge that arrived at the river dock just after dawn, having traveled downstream from a noble's estate in the northern Nome. The grain is emmer wheat, the same heavy golden grain that filled the first cart, and the quantity is being pre-measured at the dock in the standard Hicket measures." You nod once, a slow dip of your head, and the official rises to his feet with a soft grunt, turning to leave the chamber without another word. You are alone again with the tablet and the scroll, the lamp burning steadily before you, its flame a small, unwavering sun that casts its circle of light across the tabletop. You draw the tablet closer, feeling the cool, slightly rough surface of the clay under your fingertips, and you begin to read the marks that cover it. The handwriting is the same as before, the dock official's sharp, angular hieratic, each character formed with a quick, practiced efficiency that leaves no room for ornament. At the top is the date, the month of the inundation season, the day of the lunar cycle, the regnal year of the king. Below it is the name of the estate, a sprawling agricultural domain that lies along a bend in the river in the northern Nome, its boundaries defined by ancient sycamore trees and a network of irrigation canals that feed the fields. Then comes the symbol for emmer wheat, the stylized stalk with its heavy, drooping head, and after that the long columns of numbers, the Hecate signs and their multiples, arranged in neat groups of hundreds, tens, and single units. The marks are uniform and precise, the work of a man who has done this same task thousands of times, just as you have done yours. You pick up the reed pen from its groove on the wooden pallet, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers. The angle of the cup tip is natural to your hand as the grip of a familiar tool. The ink paste in the pallet's groove is still smooth and glossy, its consistency unchanged, and you dip the very tip of the pen into it, touching the surface just enough to coat the point. You lift the pen and hold it above the pallet for a heartbeat, watching the tiny excess drop of ink fall back into the groove, and then you bring the pen to the papyrus scroll. The scroll lies flat under the weight of the river stone, its surface a pale cream that glows warmly in the lamplight, and the first few columns of the previous entry stand in neat black lines, already dry and set. You begin the new entry with a thin horizontal line drawn across the width of the column, a separator that marks the boundary between one record and the next, and then you start to write. The first character is the date sign, a complex arrangement of strokes that begins with a long, sweeping horizontal line, made by dragging the pen steadily from left to right with even pressure. The ink flows smoothly from the reed, leaving a dark, glossy trail that dries almost immediately to a matte black. And you follow the horizontal with a series of smaller marks, vertical strokes and short curves that build the full character. Your hand moves slowly and deliberately, the motion guided by a deep ingrained memory that requires no conscious thought, only the quiet, patient attention of the moment. The sound of the pen on the papyrus is a soft, dry scratching that blends with the faint sizzle of the lamp flame, the two sounds together forming a kind of quiet music that fills the small, dim room. You write the month of the inundation season, the characters for the lunar day, and the regnal year of the king, each sign following the last in a steady, unhurried flow. The lamp flame flickers once, a brief dancing motion that makes the shadows on the walls shift, and you pause to watch it for a moment, your pen held motionless above the papyrus. The oil level in the bowl has dropped a little more, the wick still drawing fuel upward with its quiet, invisible efficiency, and the flame steadies itself again, returning to its tall teardrop shape. You lower the pen and continue with the next character, the name of the estate. The estate name requires a sequence of signs that represent the sounds of its designation, a combination of bird-like shapes and angular strokes that must be formed with careful attention to their proportions. You form the first sign, a long sweeping curve that starts at the top right and descends to the left, tapering to a fine point as you lift the pen. The second sign is a smaller, more compact character, a series of short vertical lines bound by a horizontal stroke, and you make it with quick, precise motions, the pen tapping lightly against the papyrus. You pause between each character to check the tablet, your eyes moving back and forth from the clay to the papyrus, verifying that each mark you make corresponds to the mark made by the dock official. The tablet's clay is slightly darker now than it was when it arrived, the surface drying gradually in the warm lamplit air, and the incised marks stand out with a sharp clarity, their edges crisp and well-defined. After the estate name comes the nome of origin, a simpler pair of signs that indicate the administrative district from which the grain was sent. The northern nome is one of the oldest in the kingdom, its boundaries established in the time of the first dynasties, and its sign is a familiar one, a stylized image of a reed and a loaf of bread, the traditional symbols of the region's fertility. You write the reed first, a single vertical stroke with a small angled hook at the top, and then the loaf, a rounded shape with a flat base and a small crosshatch pattern inside. The ink flows steadily, the consistency of the paste still perfect, and you do not need to stop and remix it. The lamplight glints off the wet ink for a brief instant before it dries, a tiny flash of reflected light that vanishes as quickly as it appears. Now you come to the grain type symbol, the emmer wheat sign that you have written so many times that your hand could form it in complete darkness. It is a simple matter of a few strokes, the vertical line of the stalk, made with a single, smooth drag of the pen, the angled head that droops to one side, a short diagonal line that ends in a small curve, and the cross-hatched marks that represent the individual grains, a series of tiny intersecting strokes clustered around the head. You make the sign with the same unhurried precision that you give to every other character, not rushing even though it is familiar, because the consistency of the record depends on the consistency of the hand that writes it. And then begin the numbers, the long, steady columns of Hicat signs and their multiples that will occupy the bulk of the entry. You dip the pen into the ink paste, wipe the excess on the rim of the pallet's groove with a small habitual motion, and you make the first Hecat sign, a circle with a horizontal line through its center, the basic unit of grain measurement. This sign repeats over and over, column after column, each one identical to the last, and yet each one made with the same careful attention, the same steady pressure, the same quiet, rhythmic motion. The scratch of the pen, the hiss of the lamp, the distant murmur of voices from the courtyard, the soft thud of grain sacks being unloaded, all of these sounds blend together into a continuous, unchanging background that wraps around you like a blanket. You write the hundreds first, a long series of Hecat signs arranged in a column that stretches down the papyrus, each sign representing 100 measures of emmer wheat. After the hundreds come the tens, a shorter column of signs that are slightly smaller in size, and after the tens come the single units, the individual Hecat measures that complete the total. The numbers are broken into these groups by the dock official's tally, and you replicate the grouping exactly as it appears on the tablet, drawing thin, horizontal lines between the columns to mark the divisions. The pen moves steadily, your hand rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic dance, and your mind settles into a quiet, watchful state, aware of the work but not straining at it, simply observing the flow of ink from pen to papyrus. The tablet's surface continues to dry, the edge is now a paler shade than the center, and you pause once to turn it slightly so that the lamplight falls across the marks at a better angle, revealing a section where the stylus had skipped slightly over a small pebble in the clay. The mark is a little faint, but it is still legible, and you trace it with the blunt end of your pen to confirm its meaning before returning to the papyrus. The scratch of the pen resumes, a soft, continuous sound that seems to fill the entire chamber, and the column of numbers grows longer with each passing moment. You reach the end of the first group of hundreds and set the pen down on the palette, flexing your fingers to release the slight stiffness that has begun to gather in the joints. You take a sip of water from the clay flask, the cool liquid soothing the dryness in your throat, and you replace the stopper before setting the flask aside. The lamp flame burns steadily, its light a warm golden presence that illuminates the table and the scroll on the tablet, and you roll your shoulders once, a slow circular motion that eases the tension between your shoulder blades. Then you pick up the pen again, dip it into the ink, wipe the tip, and begin the next group of numbers. The second group is the tens, a shorter column that requires only a fraction of the time of the first, and you write them with the same steady, methodical pace, each Hecat sign formed with precision and care. The courtyard sounds have shifted now. The first cart has been fully unloaded and has departed, its wooden wheels creaking away down the track, and a new cart is arriving at the gate, the lowing of a fresh pair of oxen carrying through the still air. You hear the drivers' voices, calm and unhurried, directing the animals to stop and turn, and the grinding of wheels on stone, and then the thud of the first grain sack being lifted down from the cart bed. These sounds are as familiar as the scratch of your pen, and they do not distract you. They are simply the outer layer of the world, a world that exists beyond the circle of lamplight, but does not intrude upon it. The tens are finished, and you draw another thin separator line before beginning the single units, the smallest group of numbers on the tablet. These are the final measures, the handful of individual Hecats that bring the total to its precise count, and you write them with a particular attention, knowing that the accuracy of the record rests on these small, final marks. The pen moves slowly, your hand making each character with deliberate care, and when the last Hecat sign is complete, you set the pen down on the palette with a soft, final click. You lean back slightly on your reed mat, your spine straightening as you release the forward tilt you have held throughout the writing, and you let your eyes travel slowly down the fresh column of ink. The characters are neat and uniform, the lines straight, the groupings clearly marked, and the ink has dried to a consistent matte black that contrasts with the pale cream of the papyrus. Everything is in order. A clean and accurate record of the shipment from the northern gnome, and you feel a quiet, private sense of completion, a small satisfaction that comes from a task done well and without error. The tablet still rests on the table beside the scroll, its surface now dry and pale, the incised mark slightly blurred at the edges where the clay has contracted as it lost moisture. Its purpose is complete. The information it held has been transferred to the permanent record, and the clay can now be returned to the dock officials for reuse, moistened and smoothed over until all traces of today's tally are gone, ready to receive tomorrow's shipment. You lift the tablet in both hands, feeling its weight, now slightly lighter than it was when wet, and you rise from your mat, your knees pressing into the reed surface as you stand. You carry the tablet to the doorway and step out into the bright, pale sunlight of the courtyard, blinking as your eyes adjust to the glare. The chief official is standing near the new cart, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the workers as they unload the heavy sacks. You approach him with the tablet held out before you, and he turns at the sound of your footsteps, his tired eyes meeting yours. You hand him the tablet without a word, and he takes it, glancing at its blank surface for a moment, already planning its return to the dock, and then he nods once, the same slow, heavy dip of his chin that marks the end of each transaction. You turn and walk back toward the dim, lamplit chamber, the cool shadows enfolding you as you cross the threshold, and you settle back onto your mat, the flame still burning, the papyrus still waiting, the next tablet already being prepared by the dock officials somewhere far down the river. The rhythm continues, steady and unchanging, and you are part of it, a single quiet note in the long, slow song of the granary. The chief official's footsteps are familiar to you now, a slow, heavy cadence that presses the gravel of the courtyard into the earth and sends a faint, rhythmic tremor through the floor of the records chamber each time his bare heel meets the stone. You sit on your reed mat, your legs crossed and your back straight, the lamp burning steadily on the table before you, its flame a small, unwavering spire of gold that has become the center of your small world. The papyrus scroll lies flat beneath the river stone, the previous entries dry and set, their neat black columns waiting to be joined by more. You have taken a sip of water from the clay flask, felt the cool liquid travel down your throat, and replaced the stopper with a soft, final press. Now you wait, your hands resting loosely on your thighs, your breathing slow and even as the footsteps grow louder and the chief official's shadow falls across the bright rectangle of the doorway. He enters the chamber carrying the second clay tally tablet of the morning, and you see immediately that this one is different from the first. It is slightly larger, a rectangle of sun-dried clay that spans the width of his broad chest, and its surface still holds a faint, darker dampness at the center where the moisture has not yet fully evaporated. The edges are paler, already drying in the warm air, and the official holds it carefully, cradling it in both palms as though it were a vessel filled with water. He lowers himself to one knee beside your table, the motion slow and deliberate, and sets the tablet down on the wooden surface next to the scroll, positioning it so that the incised marks catch the lamplight at an angle that makes the shallow grooves glisten. He looks at you, his tired eyes holding a steady, patient expression, and he speaks in his low, unhurried voice. This tablet records the grain tax from the temple estates dedicated to the god Amun, he says, the fields that lie along the floodplain to the north of the city. The barge arrived at the dock shortly after the noble's shipment, its deck loaded with sacks of emmer wheat destined for the temple granaries. The quantity is larger than the previous shipment, the official adds, and he gestures with a slight nod toward the dense columns of numbers that cover the tablet's surface. Then he rises to his feet with a soft grunt, his knees making a quiet, papery sound as he straightens, and he turns to leave the chamber, his shadow withdrawing across the floor until the rectangle of daylight is clear again. You draw the new tablet closer, feeling the slight coolness of the still damp clay against your fingertips, and you begin to read the marks that cover it. The handwriting is the same dock official's, his sharp, angular hieratic formed with the quick efficiency of long practice, but this tablet contains an additional detail that the first did not. There are corrections in red ochre. Near the middle of the tally, where a column of Hecate signs has been marked and then reconsidered, you see the faint rusty red lines that the dock official used to adjust a count. The original marks have been scratched out with a stylus tip, leaving shallow cross-hatched grooves, and beside them the red ochre ink, applied with a fine brush, provides the corrected figures. The red stands out against the pale brown clay, a small vivid interruption in the sea of black and grey impressions, and you note it with quiet attention, your eyes tracing the corrected numbers to confirm their accuracy. The lamp flame flickers as you lean closer, and you realize that the light could be brighter for this particular task. The red ochre marks are faint, and the damp clay still holds a slight sheen that can obscure the shallowest grooves at certain angles. You set the tablet aside for a moment and turn your attention to the lamp. The wick, a twist of flax that you rolled earlier in the morning, has burned down slightly, its tip now glowing with a small orange ember at the very edge of the flame. You reach toward the lamp with your thumb and forefinger, moving slowly and carefully to avoid the heat of the bowl, and you take hold of the wick just behind the pinched spout. With a gentle, steady pull, you draw the wick forward a little further from the spout, exposing a fresh, oil-soaked portion of the flax to the air. The flame responds immediately, stretching taller and brighter, its yellow body lengthening and its blue base expanding, and the circle of light on the tabletop widens by a hand's breadth. The new light catches the red ochre marks on the tablet, making them glow with a soft, rusty warmth, and you nod slightly to yourself, satisfied, before returning your attention to the record. You pick up the reed pen and check its tip, running your thumb lightly across the angled cut to feel for any splits or wear. The reed is still sharp and true, its edge clean, and you dip it into the ink paste, touching the point just enough to coat it. The paste is still smooth and glossy, its consistency perfect, and you wipe the excess ink on the rim of the pallet's groove with the small habitual motion that has become as automatic as breathing. The papyrus scroll lies ready, and you begin a new column by drawing a thin horizontal separator line across the width of the sheet, a simple stroke that marks the boundary between the noble's grain and the temple grain. Then you start to write. The first character is the date sign, and you form it with the same slow, deliberate precision that you have used all morning. The horizontal stroke sweeps from left to right, the ink flowing in a dark, glossy trail that dries almost instantly to a matte black, and you follow it with the vertical strokes and short curves that build the full character. You write the month of the inundation season, the day of the lunar cycle, and the regnal year of the king, each sign following the last in a steady, unhurried flow. The lamplight glints off the wet ink for a brief moment before it dries, a tiny flash of reflected light that vanishes as quickly as it appears, and the scratch of the pen on the papyrus blends with the faint sizzle of the flame. Next comes the name of the temple, the great house of the god Amun that stands in the northern part of the city, its stone pylons visible from the river. The temple's name is written with a series of characters that begin with the sign for a sacred enclosure, a rectangular shape with small flags flying from its top, and you form it with careful attention to its proportions. The rectangle is made with 4 straight strokes, top and bottom, left and right, and the flags are small angled marks that extend from the upper corners like tiny banners frozen in stone. After the enclosure sign comes the name of Amun himself, a complex sequence of characters that includes the tall feathered crown and the wavy line representing water, the 2 symbols that together form the god's sacred name. You write them slowly, the pen rising and falling in a quiet rhythm, and you pause between each character to verify the marks on the tablet, your eyes moving from the dried clay to the fresh ink with calm, methodical patience. Below the temple's name is a list of the specific fields from which this grain was harvested, each one identified by a short description and a location along the floodplain. The dock official has written these field names in a smaller, more cramped hand, fitting them into the space between the temple name and the columns of numbers. You read the first field name, a designation that refers to the shape of the plot. A long, narrow strip of land runs parallel to an irrigation canal, and you form the characters with a smaller, tighter hand to match the scale of the original. The second field is named for a stand of ancient sycamore trees that shade its northern boundary, and you write the tree sign, a stylized trunk with 3 branches, followed by the sign for a boundary marker, a simple vertical stroke with a crossbar. The third field lies near the river's edge, its soil dark and rich from the annual inundation, and its name includes the sign for water, the same wavy line that appears in the god's name, repeated here to indicate the river's proximity. You write each field name in turn, your hand moving with a steady, patient precision, and the list grows on the papyrus, a quiet inventory of the temple's agricultural wealth. The lamp flame, now brighter and taller, casts its warm glow across the entire tabletop, and you can see every detail of the tablet and the scroll with perfect clarity. The red ochre corrections near the center of the tablet catch the light and hold it, their rusty color a small vivid note in the otherwise monochrome palette of the record. You pause in your writing to examine these corrections once more, tracing them with the blunt end of your pen to confirm that the adjusted numbers are consistent with the total at the bottom of the tablet. The dock official has done his work well. The arithmetic is correct, the tally now accurate, and you make a small, silent nod to yourself before returning to the papyrus. Now you come to the numbers themselves, the long, dense columns of Hecate signs that record the temple's grain tax. The quantity is significantly larger than the noble's shipment, requiring many more columns of hundreds, tens, and single units, and the tablet's surface is nearly covered with the repeating patterns of circles and lines. You dip your pen into the ink paste, wipe the tip on the palette's rim, and begin the first column of hundreds, your hand moving in its slow, rhythmic dance. The Hecate sign is a circle with a horizontal line through its center, and you make it again and again, each instance identical to the last, the pen tracing the same curve, the same straight line, the same lift and set down. The scratch of the pen fills the small room, a soft, continuous sound that seems to merge with the hiss of the lamp and the distant murmur of the courtyard, and your mind settles deeper into its quiet, watchful state. You write the hundreds in groups of 10, drawing a thin vertical separator line between each group to make the count easier for the archivists who will read this scroll in future seasons. The pen moves steadily, your hand rising and falling, your wrist pivoting slightly with each stroke, and the column grows longer and longer, a dense forest of black marks on the pale cream papyrus. The temple fields have produced a great abundance this year. The numbers reflect a harvest that filled many barges, many carts, many silos, and you transcribe it all with the same calm, unvarying attention, each Hecate sign as carefully formed as the one before it. The tens column follows the hundreds, a shorter but still substantial list, and you draw another separator line before beginning it. The characters are slightly smaller, the proportions adjusted to fit the narrower space, and you form them with a slightly lighter touch to keep the ink from spreading too thickly on the fibrous surface. The single units come last, the final handful of measures that bring the total to its precise count, and you write them with a particular care, knowing that these small marks are the final critical pieces of the record. When the last Hecate sign is complete, you set the pen down on the palette with a soft click, and you lean back slightly, rolling your shoulders to ease the tension that has gathered between your shoulder blades. The tablet now lies on the table, its surface fully dry, the damp center having faded to the same pale buff as the edges. The red ochre corrections still stand out, small rusty marks that tell a quiet story of a tally reconsidered and adjusted, a small human error caught and repaired before it could propagate through the kingdom's accounts. You lift the tablet in both hands, its weight solid and familiar, and you rise from your mat, your knees pressing briefly against the reed surface before you stand. You carry the tablet to the doorway and step out into the courtyard, where the sun is now high and white, casting sharp, short shadows across the gravel and heating the stones until a faint, shimmering heat haze rises from their surface. The chief official is standing near the base of one of the great silos, his hands clasped behind his back, watching as a worker climbs a ladder to open the small wooden door at the top. He turns at the sound of your footsteps, and you hold out the tablet to him. He takes it, glances at the dried surface, his eyes pausing for a moment on the red ochre corrections, and then he nods once, the same slow, heavy dip of his chin. No words are needed. You turn and walk back toward the dim, lamplit chamber, the cool shadows enfolding you as you cross the threshold, and you settle back onto your mat, the flames still burning tall and bright, the papyrus still waiting, the rhythm of the granary still turning in its slow, eternal cycle. The chief official returns with a different kind of tablet in his hands, and you notice the change before he even crosses the threshold of the records chamber. This tablet is smaller than the previous ones, its edges less perfectly squared, and its surface bears the slightly rougher texture of clay that was worked by a less experienced hand. The official carries it with the same careful, two-handed grip, his tired eyes meeting yours as he steps into the circle of lamplight, and he lowers himself to one knee beside your table with the slow, deliberate motion that has become as familiar as the flame itself. He sets the tablet down on the wooden surface next to the papyrus scroll, and the lamplight catches the incised marks, revealing a different pattern than the emmer wheat tallies you have been recording all morning. He speaks in his low, unhurried voice, explaining that the cart outside is now laden with barley, a lesser tax from a village of tenant farmers who work a strip of land along the floodplain to the east. The barley is recorded in separate ledgers, he reminds you, destined not for the palace bakeries, but for the brewing houses where the kingdom's beer is produced. The script you will use is the same hieratic hand, but the words are different, the category markers distinct, and the quantities measured in the same hecat units, though the grain itself is lighter and more pale. He gestures toward the tablet with a slight nod of his chin, and then he rises to his feet with a soft grunt, his knees making that quiet, papery sound as he straightens, and he turns to leave the chamber without another word. You draw the barley tablet closer, feeling the rougher surface under your fingertips, the slight grit of the clay that was not smoothed as carefully as the dock official's work. The marks are still legible, the angular, hieratic characters formed with a competent if less elegant hand, and you begin to read the record from the top. The date is the same as the previous tablets, the month of the inundation season, the lunar day, the regnal year of the king, and you note this with a small, silent acknowledgement, the continuity of the day's records forming a single, unbroken thread. Below the date is the name of the tenant village, a small settlement of perhaps 20 households that lies along an irrigation canal, its name written with the signs for a reed thicket and a low, flat hill. Then comes the grain-type symbol for barley, a different character than the emmer sign, a stalk with a longer, more upright head, and the series of small diagonal marks representing the bristles that cover the barley ear. After the symbol come the columns of numbers, the hecat signs and their multiples, arranged in the same neat groups of hundreds, tens, and single units, though the total quantity is noticeably smaller than the temple's vast shipment. You reach for a fresh papyrus scroll from the shelf behind you, turning on your reed mat to lift it from the stack with both hands. The scroll is about the same length as the emmer ledger, its surface a pale cream with the faint lines of the pressed strips visible beneath, and it is tied with a simple linen cord that you loosen with a slow, careful pull. You unroll the first portion and lay it flat on the table, positioning it beside the emmer scroll, and you weight it down with the second riverstone that you keep for this purpose, a smooth, oval-shaped rock that fits neatly in your palm. The barley records must be kept separate from the emmer, as the official reminded you, because the two grains serve different purposes in the kingdom's economy, and the archivists will need to find each category without searching through a single, undifferentiated scroll. The new papyrus lies flat and ready, its surface glowing warmly in the lamplight, and you pick up your reed pen to begin. The first character is the date sign, and you form it with the same slow, deliberate precision that you have used for every entry today, the horizontal stroke sweeping from left to right with even pressure, the ink flowing in a dark, glossy trail that dries almost instantly to a matte black. You write the month, the lunar day, and the regnal year, each sign following the last in a steady, unhurried flow, and the scratch of the pen on the new papyrus is a slightly crisper sound, the fibers of this scroll being a little drier and stiffer than the emmer scroll that has been absorbing moisture from the air all morning. The lamp flame burns steadily, its tall, bright spire casting a warm circle of light across both scrolls now, and the shadows in the corners of the room seem to press a little closer, gathered just beyond the edge of the illumination. After the date comes the village name, the signs for the reed thicket and the low hill, and you form them with careful attention to their proportions. The reed, a series of vertical strokes bound by a horizontal line. The hill, a simple, rounded shape with a flat base. The pen moves slowly, your hand guided by the deep, ingrained memory of the hieratic forms, and you pause between each character to verify the marks on the tablet, your eyes moving from the rough clay to the fresh ink with the same calm, methodical patience you have maintained all morning. The village name is followed by the grain-type symbol for barley, that upright stalk with its bristly head, and you write it with a few quick strokes, the diagonal marks for the bristles made with small flicking motions of your wrist. Then begin the numbers, the columns of Hecate signs that record the barley tax, and your hand settles into its familiar rhythm, the dip and wipe and stroke and lift that has carried you through the morning's work. The scratch of the pen, the hiss of the lamp, the distant murmur of voices from the courtyard where the barley cart is being unloaded, all of these sounds blend together into a continuous, unchanging background. The barley numbers are fewer than the emma numbers, the columns shorter, the groups of hundreds and tens and units requiring less time to transcribe, and you move through them with a steady, unhurried pace. Each Hecate sign is carefully formed as the ones that fill the emma scroll. As you write, you become aware of a slight sensation in your right hand, a faint, dull ache that has begun to gather in the muscles between your thumb and forefinger, the place where the reed pen rests against your skin. It is not pain, exactly, but a quiet tiredness, a signal from your body that you had been writing for many hours without pause. You finish the current column of numbers, drawing the thin, horizontal separator line at its end, and then you set the pen down in its groove on the wooden pallet, the soft click of the reed against the wood, a small, definitive sound in the quiet room. You flex your fingers slowly, opening and closing your hand several times to release the tension, and the ache subsides a little, fading into a gentle, warm sensation that spreads through your palm. Now is the moment for a drink of water. You reach for your clay cup, a simple unglazed vessel that sits at the corner of the table, its surface a matte reddish brown with no decoration. You lift it with your left hand, feeling the slight roughness of the fired clay against your palm, and you bring it to your lips. The water inside is cool, having been drawn from the household jar early in the morning and stored in the shade of the record's chamber, and it has absorbed a faint, earthy taste from the clay, a subtle mineral flavor that is both familiar and refreshing. You drink slowly, letting the water soothe the dryness in your throat and the back of your mouth, and you feel the cool liquid travel down into your chest, a small, quiet refreshment that reawakens your senses. You lower the cup and hold it in your lap for a moment, your eyes resting on the lamplight as it dances slightly, the flame responding to some tiny, invisible current in the still air. Outside the chamber, beyond the thick mud brick walls, the sun is now high and white, directly overhead or nearly so, and it beats down on the courtyard stones with a steady, relentless pressure. The heat rises from the gravel in a faint shimmering haze that you can just see through the open doorway, a distortion of the air that makes the edges of the far wall waver slightly, as though the stone itself is breathing. The workers in the courtyard have slowed their pace, their voices lower and less frequent, their movements more deliberate as they conserve their energy in the midday warmth. The oxen stand in the shade of the gatehouse, their great heads lowered, their tails switching slowly to ward off the flies that have become more active in the heat. The granary silos, those tall, conical shapes that dominate the skyline, seem to shimmer at their tops, the baked clay surfaces radiating the heat they have absorbed since dawn. You watch the heat haze for a moment, your body still and relaxed on the reed mat, and you feel the coolness of the records chamber around you, the thick walls and the absence of windows keeping the interior temperature lower than the courtyard outside. The lamp flame, small as it is, adds a faint warmth to the air near your table, but it is not uncomfortable, just a gentle presence that you are barely aware of. The smell of the room, the dry papyrus, the cedar oil, the faint nuttiness of the lamp oil, the dusty clay of the storage jars, all of these scents mingle in the still air and settle around you like a familiar garment. You take another sip of water, the last one, and then you set the cup back on the table in its place at the corner, the clay base making a soft, muted sound as it meets the wood. The slight ache in your hand has faded completely now, replaced by a warm, loose feeling that will carry you through the rest of the barley entries. You pick up the reed pen again, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers, and you check the tip, running your thumb across the angled cut to feel for any wear. The reed is still sharp and true, its edge clean, and you dip it into the ink paste, which remains smooth and glossy in the palett's groove, its consistency unchanged by the hours of use. You wipe the excess ink on the rim of the groove, the small habitual motion that marks the beginning of each new writing session, and you return your attention to the barley tablet. The remaining columns of numbers are short, the tens and the single units, and you write them with a steady, methodical pace, each Hecate sign following the last in a quiet, rhythmic flow. The scratch of the pen resumes, the soft, dry sound filling the small room, and your mind settles back into its watchful, meditative state, aware of the work but not straining at it, simply observing the movement of ink from pen to papyrus. The barley records are simpler than the temple records. No red ochre corrections to verify, no complex field names to transcribe, just the straightforward tally of a small village's tax obligation, a modest contribution to the kingdom's brewing houses. When the last Hecate sign is complete, you set the pen down on the palette with a soft click and lean back slightly, rolling your shoulders to ease the quiet tension that has gathered between your shoulder blades. You let your eyes travel slowly down the fresh column of ink, checking for any broken characters or accidental blots, but the barley record is clean and legible, each mark precisely where it should be, the groupings clearly separated by the thin, horizontal lines. The ink has dried to a uniform matte black that contrasts with the pale cream of the papyrus, and the scroll now holds its first complete entry, the beginning of a new ledger that will be stored in the archives alongside the Emma scrolls. The barley tablet, its surface now fully dry and its edges a uniform pale buff, has served its purpose, and you lift it in both hands, feeling the lighter weight of the smaller clay rectangle. You rise from your mat, your knees pressing briefly against the reed surface before you stand, and you carry the tablet to the doorway, stepping out into the bright white glare of the midday courtyard. The heat hits you immediately, a warm, dry pressure against your skin, and you squint against the brightness, the sun directly above casting only the smallest shadows at your feet. The chief official is standing in the shade of the gatehouse, his back against the mud brick wall, a cup of water in his own hand, and he turns at the sound of your footsteps. You hand him the barley tablet, and he takes it with a slow nod, his tired eyes squinting against the glare. The transaction is complete, silent, and efficient, and you turn to walk back toward the dim, cool chamber, the shadows enfolding you as you cross the threshold, the lamp still burning, the papyrus still waiting, the rhythm of the granary still turning in its slow, eternal cycle. The afternoon arrives without announcement, a slow shift in the quality of the light that falls through the open doorway of the records chamber, and you feel it before you see it. The sharp white rectangle that had been painted on the packed earth floor by the midday sun begins to soften at its edges, the brightness fading to a pale, warm gold that no longer stings the eye when you glance toward it. The shadows inside the room, which had been pressed back into the farthest corners, now begin to stretch outward again, creeping across the floor in thin, slow fingers that advance with an almost imperceptible motion. The air in the chamber remains cool and still, but the quality of the silence changes, deepening into something heavier, a quiet that has settled in for the long, slow descent toward evening. The lamp on your table continues to burn, its flame a steady, unwavering spire of gold that has become the true constant of your day, the one thing that does not alter as the hours pass. You have just completed the barley entries for the tenant village, and the fresh scroll lies flat under its river stone, the ink dry and dark against the pale papyrus. The tablet has been returned to the chief official, and you have taken another sip of water from the clay cup, the cool liquid, a small comfort in the stillness. Now you sit on your reed mat, your legs crossed, and your back straight, and you become aware of a new sensation that has been gathering slowly over the course of the morning, a dull, steady ache that has settled into your shoulders and the back of your neck. It is not a sharp pain, nothing that demands your immediate attention, but a deep, persistent tiredness that comes from leaning forward over the low table, for hour after hour, your head angled down toward the papyrus, your arms held in the same position, your spine curved into the same gentle bow. You roll your head once, a slow, careful motion to the left, and the muscles in your neck stretch and complain, releasing a small measure of the tension they've been holding. Then you roll your head to the right, the same slow, measured movement, and another layer of tightness loosens, spreading a faint, warm sensation down toward your shoulder blades. The ache does not disappear, but it retreats, becoming a quiet, manageable presence that you can carry with you through the remaining hours of the day. You lift your shoulders toward your ears, hold them there for a slow count of 3, and then let them drop, the motion sending a ripple of relaxation through your upper back. The reed mat beneath you is thin, its woven surface pressing against your crossed legs, and you shift your weight slightly, uncrossing your legs and stretching them out in front of you for a moment, your feet pressing against the cool, packed earth of the floor. The change of position offers a brief refreshment, a small release of the stiffness that has accumulated in your hips and knees, and then you fold your legs again, settling back into the familiar posture, your back straight, your hands resting loosely on your thighs. The lamp flame flickers once, a quick, dancing motion that draws your eye, and you glance at the oil level in the bowl, noting that it has dropped visibly since the morning. The pale gold liquid now sits a full finger's width below the rim, the wick still drawing fuel upward with its quiet, invisible efficiency. But the supply is slowly diminishing, and you make a mental note that you will need to refill the bowl before the final entries of the day. The flame itself remains tall and bright, the wick still burning cleanly, and the circle of light on the tabletop is as warm and steady as it was at dawn, a small, unchanging island in the darkening room. The chief official's footsteps approach the doorway again, his slow, heavy tread pressing into the gravel of the courtyard with a rhythm that you know by heart. His shadow falls across the golden rectangle of light, a broad, dark shape that precedes him into the chamber, and then he steps inside, ducking his head under the low lintel with the same careful motion he has used all day. In his hands he carries not one tablet but several, a small stack of them balanced against his chest, each one a rectangle of sun-dried clay marked with the tallies of grain taxes. He lowers himself to one knee beside your table, the motion accompanied by the familiar soft grunt and the papery sound of his joints, and he sets the stack down on the wooden surface next to your pallet, the tablets clacking together with a muted, earthy sound. He looks at you, his tired eyes meeting yours, and he speaks in his low, unhurried voice, explaining that these are the records from a series of minor officials who pay taxes on behalf of distant villages, all of them in barley, the grain destined for the brewing houses. The villages lie scattered along the floodplain to the east and south, small settlements of tenant farmers and field workers, and their contributions are modest, each one a fraction of the great temple's shipment, but they must be recorded with the same care and precision as all the rest. The official gestures toward the stack with a slight nod of his chin, and then he rises to his feet and leaves the chamber, his shadow withdrawing across the floor until the doorway is clear again. You draw the stack of tablets toward you, feeling the weight of them, the slightly rough texture of the clay against your palms. There are 5 tablets in the stack, each one about the size of your hand, their surfaces marked with the angular hieratic characters of different scribes, each handwriting distinct in its slant and pressure and spacing. The first tablet comes from a village named for a stand of acacia trees that grows along an old irrigation canal, and you read the name with your lips moving silently, forming the signs for the thorny tree and the flowing water. The second village is named for a low, rocky hill that rises from the floodplain, a landmark visible from the river, and its name is written with the signs for stone and elevation. The third is a village that sits at the junction of 2 canals, its name a compound of the signs for water and crossing. The 4th and 5th villages bear names that refer to the families who founded them, the descendants of old settlers whose lineage traces back to the early dynasties, and their names are written with the signs for house and father and son. Each tablet records a quantity of barley, the Hecate signs and their multiples arranged in neat columns, the numbers, small and modest, a few hundred Hecates here, a few tens there, the combined contribution of many small fields and many hard-working hands. You pick up your reed pen and check the tip, running your thumb lightly across the angled cut, and you find it still sharp and true. The ink paste in the palette's groove has thickened slightly from the warmth of the lamp, and you add a single drop of water from the clay flask, mixing it in with the blunt end of the pen until the consistency returns to its smooth, glossy state. The papyrus scroll for the barley records lies ready, its surface glowing warmly in the lamplight, and you begin a new entry by drawing a thin, horizontal separator line across the width of the column, marking the boundary between the tenant village's record and the first of the minor official's contributions. The scratch of the pen is a soft, dry sound that fills the quiet room, blending with the hiss of the lamp and the distant, muffled noises of the courtyard, where the workers continue to unload the remaining carts in the afternoon heat. You write the date first, the same date that appears on all the records of this day, the month of the inundation season, the lunar day, the regnal year of the king. The characters form under your hand with the same slow, deliberate precision, the horizontal strokes sweeping from left to right, the vertical lines dropping down with even pressure, the curves tracing their familiar arcs. The ink flows smoothly, drying almost instantly to a matte black, and the lamplight glints off the wet surface for a brief, fleeting moment before it sets. Then you write the name of the first village, the signs for the acacia tree and the flowing water, and you pause between each character to check the tablet, your eyes moving from the rough clay to the fresh papyrus with the careful, methodical attention that has guided you all day. The grain-type symbol for barley follows, that upright stalk with its bristly head, and then you begin the columns of numbers, the Hecate signs that repeat in their steady, hypnotic rhythm. The first village's contribution is small, only a few hundred Hecates, and the numbers take little time to transcribe. The second village follows immediately, its record on the next tablet, and you draw another separator line before beginning the new entry, the date and the village name and the grain symbol and the numbers flowing in their established order. The ache in your shoulders and neck has not disappeared. It remains a quiet, steady presence, a dull pressure that sits at the base of your skull and radiates outward, and you pause once to roll your head again, a slow, circular motion that loosens the tightness for a few moments before it returns. Your hand continues to move, the pen rising and falling in its familiar dance, and the columns of numbers grow longer on the papyrus, the ink characters forming a dense, orderly forest of black marks. As you work through the third tablet, the one from the village at the junction of two canals, you notice that your vision is not as sharp as it was in the morning. The characters on the tablet seem to blur slightly at the edges, the angular marks softening and merging together, and you have to blink deliberately to clear your eyes. A slow, conscious closing and opening of your lids that restores the sharpness for a time. You lift your head and look away from the tablet, letting your gaze rest on the lamp flame for a moment, the bright, steady spire of gold, a soothing presence that helps your eyes relax. The flame wavers slightly, responding to some tiny invisible current in the air, and then it steadies again, its light a constant, comforting anchor. You blink once more slowly and then return your attention to the tablet, the characters now clear and distinct, and you continue to write. The fourth tablet presents a small challenge. The handwriting is cramped and hurried, the hieratic characters formed with less precision than the others, and you have to trace each entry with the blunt end of your pen to distinguish the numbers clearly. You place the tip of the pen against the clay and follow the incised lines, the shallow grooves guiding your touch, and you read the tally aloud in a whisper, your voice barely audible even to yourself, the words for the Hecate measures forming in the still air and vanishing immediately. The tracing helps. The numbers resolve themselves into their proper order, and you transfer them to the papyrus with the same careful, methodical strokes, your hand moving slowly, your breathing slow and even, the quiet rhythm of the work wrapping around you like a blanket. The fifth tablet is the last in the stack, and its record is the simplest of all, a single column of numbers with no corrections or complications, and you transcribe it quickly, the pen scratching across the papyrus in a final, steady flow. When the last Haycat sign is complete, you set the pen down on the pallet and lean back, your spine straightening as you release the forward tilt you have held for so long. The ache in your shoulders and neck is more pronounced now, a deep, tired soreness that is settled into the muscles and will not be easily dismissed. And you press your palms against the back of your neck, the warmth of your hands a small comfort against the tight skin. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the darkness behind your lids wash over you, and you breathe slowly in and out, the air in the chamber cool and dry and smelling of papyrus and oil and ancient dust. The lamp continues to burn, its flame a steady golden presence that you can sense even through your closed eyelids, a faint warm glow that tints the darkness orange. You open your eyes again, and the room is the same as it was, the table and the scrolls and the stack of used tablets, the shadows in the corners a little deeper now, the rectangle of light from the doorway, a softer, more muted gold that speaks of the sun's slow descent toward the western horizon. The stack of tablets is complete, their records transferred, and you gather them in your hands, feeling their combined weight, the rough edges pressing against your palms. You rise from the reed mat, your knees and hips complaining with a quiet familiar stiffness, and you carry the tablets to the doorway, stepping out into the afternoon light. The courtyard is quieter now than it was at midday, the workers resting in the shade of the silos, their voices low and intermittent. The heat is still present, a warm, dry pressure that wraps around you, but it is no longer the intense white blare of noon. It is softened, mellowed, the angle of the sun now casting longer shadows that stretch across the gravel toward the eastern wall. The chief official is sitting on a low stone bench near the gate, his back against the mud brick, his eyes half closed in a posture of rest, and he opens them as you approach, the tired lids lifting slowly. You hand him the stack of tablets, and he takes them with a nod, his hands closing around the clay rectangles, and then he sets them aside on the bench beside him, to be returned to the dock officials for reuse. The transaction is silent, as all your transactions have been, a simple exchange of objects and glances, and you turn and walk back toward the dim chamber, the shadows enfolding you once more as you cross the threshold. You settle back onto your reed mat, adjusting your position until your legs are comfortably crossed and your back is straight, and you look at the lamp. The oil level has dropped further, the pale gold liquid now a shallow pool at the bottom of the bowl, and the wick has burned down to a shorter stub, its tip still glowing with the steady flame that has been your companion since before dawn. You know that you will need to add more oil soon and perhaps replace the wick entirely before the final entries of the day, but for now the flame still burns tall and bright, its light unwavering, and you let it be. The papyrus scrolls wait on the table, the emmer records on one side, and the barley records on the other, their surfaces covered with the neat black columns of your handwriting, a day's worth of quiet, patient labor made visible in ink and fiber. You rest your hands on your thighs and breathe slowly, feeling the tiredness in your body and the calm, steady presence of the flame, and you wait for the chief official to return with the next batch of tablets, the final entries of the afternoon, the last measures of grain that will complete the day's record before the sun sets and the lamp is extinguished, and the long, quiet night begins. The afternoon has deepened, and the light that falls through the doorway of the records chamber has shifted again, the pale gold rectangle now carrying a faint, warm tint that speaks of the sun's slow descent toward the western horizon. The shadows inside the room have grown longer and thicker, stretching across the packed earth floor in dark, formless pools that lap at the edges of the lamplight like a quiet tide. The flame on your table continues to burn, its spire of gold as steady and unwavering as it has been since the early morning, but you notice now that the oil level in the bowl has dropped to a shallow pool, the pale liquid barely covering the base of the wick, and you know that before much longer you will need to refill it from the storage jar. The wick itself is burned down to a short, glowing stub, its tip a tiny orange ember that feeds the flame with a quiet, constant devotion, and the circle of light it casts has contracted slightly, drawing close around the table and leaving the corners of the room in deeper darkness. You have just returned from delivering the stack of minor officials' tablets to the chief official, and you settle back onto your reed mat, adjusting your position until your legs are comfortably crossed and your back is straight. The ache in your shoulders and neck has become a familiar companion now, a dull, steady pressure that sits at the base of your skull and radiates outward, no longer demanding your attention, but simply present, a quiet reminder of the hours you have spent leaning over the low table. You roll your head once to the left and once to the right, the slow circular motion loosening the tightness for a few moments, and then you reach for the oil storage jar that sits against the left wall, lifting it with both hands and carrying it back to your table. The jar is heavy, its wide belly filled with the pale gold oil that has sustained your lamp throughout the day, and you set it down beside your mat with a soft, careful thud, the clay base meeting the packed earth floor with a muted sound. You remove the wooden stopper, the linen wrapping rasping against the clay neck, and the smell of the oil rises into the still air, a mild, nutty scent that mingles with the dry papyrus and the faint smokiness of the burning wick. The lamp oil is still warm from the hours of heat, and you handle it carefully, lifting it from the table with both hands and tilting it slightly so that the remaining oil pools at one side. Then you lift the storage jar and pour fresh oil into the bowl in a slow, thin stream, the pale liquid glugging softly as it flows from the wide belly through the narrow neck. The new oil swirls and mixes with the old, the level rising steadily until it reaches just below the rim, a finger's width from the top, and you set the storage jar down and replace the stopper with a firm, careful press. You carry the jar back to its place against the wall, and then you return to the lamp, checking the wick. The flax is burned too short to draw fuel efficiently, and you decide to replace it with a fresh twist. You pinch the old wick between your thumb and forefinger, pulling it from the spout with a slow, steady motion, the charred end crumbling slightly at your touch, and you set it aside on a small scrap of linen. From the storage jar of flax fibers, you take a new tuft, separating a smaller portion and rolling it between your fingertips with the same careful, methodical motion you used in the morning, the fibers twisting upon themselves into a uniform cord. You soak the new wick in the oil, tuck it into the spout, and the flame, which had been guttering low without fresh fuel, catches the oil-soaked flax and rises again, taller and brighter than before, the circle of light on the tabletop expanding outward and pushing the shadows back to their proper place. The chief official's footsteps approach the doorway, and you look up to see his broad, dark silhouette filling the golden rectangle of light. He steps inside, ducking his head under the low lintel, and in his hands he carries a single tablet, larger than the others you have seen today, its surface a pale smooth clay that bears the marks of a particularly careful stylus. He lowers himself to one knee beside your table, the motion accompanied by the familiar soft grunt, and he sets the tablet down on the wooden surface with a particular gentleness, as though it was something more valuable than the ordinary tallies. He looks at you, his tired eyes holding a new expression, something that might be called reverence or perhaps simply a quiet, professional respect for the importance of what the tablet records, and he speaks in his low, unhurried voice, the words carrying a weight that the previous announcements did not. This shipment, he says, is a cargo of spelt, a grain with a tough, fibrous husk that must be threshed differently than emerald barley, and is recorded separately because its volume is measured differently after processing. The spelt comes from the king's own fields, the royal domain that stretches along the richest part of the floodplain to the south, and the grain is destined for the palace bakeries, where it will be made into bread for the king's own table. The penmanship must be flawless, the official adds, his voice dropping slightly, and he gestures toward the tablet with a slow, deliberate nod. Then he rises to his feet and leaves the chamber, his footsteps retreating across the courtyard, and you are alone with the royal tablet and the lamp and the waiting papyrus. You draw the tablet toward you with a new kind of care, your fingers touching the smooth, cool surface with a lighter pressure than usual. The clay has been prepared with exceptional attention, the surface burnished to a fine, even finish that feels almost like polished stone under your fingertips, and the incised marks are crisp and deep, each character formed with a precision that speaks of the royal scribe's long years of training. The handwriting is different from the dock official's angular, hurried style. It is a more formal, more elegant hieratic, each stroke placed with deliberate grace, the proportions perfectly balanced, the spacing even and measured. At the top of the tablet is the date, the same month and lunar day and regnal year that you have written many times today, but here the characters are inscribed with a particular flourish, a slight, elegant curl at the end of the year, sign that marks it as a royal document. Below the date is the name of the king's estate, written with the signs for the palace and the royal cartouche, the oval ring that encloses the king's sacred name, a circle of protection drawn around the syllables that represent the living God on earth. You touch the cartouche lightly with the tip of your finger, tracing its smooth, unbroken curve, and you feel the weight of its significance. The knowledge that this grain belongs to the king himself, the lord of the two lands, the son of the sun god. The grain type symbol for spelt is different from both emmer and barley, a character you do not write as often, and you take a moment to study it on the tablet before you begin. It shows a stalk with a broad, flat head and a series of small horizontal lines that represent the tough husk that encloses each grain, the fibrous shell that must be broken open by a special threshing process before the flour can be ground. You trace the character with your finger, memorizing its proportions, the angle of the stalk, the width of the head, the spacing of the husk lines, and you practice the motion once in the air above the papyrus before you commit it to ink. You pick up a fresh reed pen from the bundle, selecting one with a particularly fine, sharp tip that will allow you to form the characters with the extra precision the royal record demands. You check the cut, running your thumb across the angled edge, and you find it perfect, the reed clean and true. The ink paste in the pellet's groove is still smooth and glossy, and you dip the very tip of the pen into it, coating only the finest point, wiping the excess with a careful, slow motion on the rim of the groove. The papyrus scroll for the emmer records lies open on the table, but this spelt shipment must be recorded on a separate ledger, and you reach for a fresh scroll from the shelf behind you, selecting one of the finest quality, its surface a paler, smoother cream than the others, the pressed strips barely visible beneath the polished finish. You unroll the first portion and weight it down with the smooth river stone, and then you begin to write. The first character you form is the date sign, and you make it with a larger, more careful hand than you have used for any of the previous entries, the horizontal stroke sweeping from left to right with an even, deliberate pressure, the vertical lines dropping down with a slow, measured precision, the curves tracing their arcs with a fluid grace that you rarely allow yourself in the ordinary records. The ink flows smoothly, the dark, glossy line settling into the papyrus fibers and drying almost instantly to a matte black, and the lamplight glints off the surface for a brief, fleeting moment before it sets. The regnal year of the king follows, and you write the cartouche with particular care, forming the oval ring with a single, unbroken stroke, the line curving around and meeting itself with perfect closure, and then you inscribe the king's name inside it, each sacred syllable formed with the slowest, most deliberate movements of the day. The estate name comes next, the signs for the royal domain, and you write them with the same large, formal hand, the characters standing out on the papyrus with a clarity and elegance that befits their subject. The lamp flame burns tall and bright, its new oil and fresh wick producing a steady, unwavering light that illuminates every detail of your work, and the scratch of the fine-tipped pen on the smooth papyrus is a softer, higher sound than the ordinary reed, a gentle, whispering scratch that seems to suit the solemnity of the royal record. You pause between each character to check the tablet, your eyes moving from the burnished clay to the fresh ink with the careful, methodical attention that the king's grain deserves, and you do not allow yourself to rush, even though the afternoon is wearing on and your body is tired. The royal record must be perfect, and you give it the time and care it requires. After the estate name comes the grain type symbol for spelt, that unfamiliar stalk with its broad flat head and its horizontal husk lines, and you form it with the same deliberate precision, each stroke placed exactly where it should be, the proportions matching the tablet's model. Then begin the numbers, the columns of Hecat signs that record the king's grain tax, and you write them with a larger hand than the ordinary records, each Hecat sign formed with the same elegant formal style, the circles perfectly round, the horizontal lines precisely centered, the spacing between each sign uniform and measured. The quantity is not the largest you've recorded today. The temple's emma shipment was greater in volume, but the royal spelt is measured differently. Its value calculated not in hecats alone, but in the quality of the grain and the prestige of its destination. And you transcribe the numbers with a quiet, focused reverence that has not been necessary for the barley from the tenant villages or even the emma from the noble's estate. The lamp sputters once, a tiny, sharp pop that breaks the profound silence of the chamber, and you pause, your pen held motionless above the papyrus, watching the flame as it dances and then steadies itself. The sound is a small, ordinary thing, a tiny impurity in the oil that has reached the wick and burned with a momentary flash. But in the quiet of the room, it seems louder than it is. A brief, sharp note in the otherwise smooth, unbroken hum of the flame. You wait for the fire to settle, the yellow spire returning to its tall, unwavering shape, and then you continue with the next column of numbers, the pen scratching softly on the smooth papyrus. The afternoon outside the chamber has grown quieter still, the workers in the courtyard having completed most of their unloading, and the voices that drift through the doorway are fewer and farther between, low murmurs that barely register against the background of the flame's hiss and the pen's scratch. The air in the room is heavy now, heavier than it was in the morning, the smell of hot oil and ancient paper, and the faint, dusty scent of the storage jars combining into a thick, somnolent atmosphere that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. Your eyelids feel slightly heavier than they did, the long hours of focused work pulling at your awareness, and you blink slowly, deliberately, to keep your vision clear and sharp. The royal record demands your full attention, and you give it willingly, setting aside the tiredness in your body and the ache in your shoulders, focusing entirely on the flow of ink from pen to papyrus. You write the final column of numbers, the single Hecat units that complete the spell tally, and you form each one with the same slow, careful precision, the circles perfectly round, the lines precisely centered, the spacing uniform and even. When the last Hecat sign is complete, you set the pen down on the palette with a soft final click, and you lean back slightly, letting out a slow, quiet breath that you did not realize you had been holding. Your eyes travel down the fresh column of ink, checking each character, each line, each grouping, and you find no errors, no blots, no broken strokes. The royal record is clean and perfect, a document that could be presented to the king's own overseer without shame, and you feel a quiet, private satisfaction settle into your chest, a small, warm glow that matches the steady flame of the lamp. The tablet, its surface still smooth and cool, has served its purpose, and you lift it in both hands with the same careful gentleness with which you received it. You rise from your reed mat, your body protesting with the familiar stiffness, and you carry the royal tablet to the doorway, stepping out into the late afternoon light. The sun is now low in the western sky, its rays slanting across the courtyard in long golden beams that catch the tops of the silos and set them glowing with a warm, honeyed light. The shadows stretch across the gravel in dark, elongated shapes, and the heat of the day has begun to fade, replaced by a cooler, softer air that carries the first hint of evening. The chief official is standing near the gate, his hands clasped behind his back, and he turns as you approach, his tired eyes meeting yours. You hand him the royal tablet, and he takes it with a nod that is slower and deeper than the ones he has given you before, a gesture of shared understanding, of mutual recognition of the task's importance. You turn and walk back toward the lamplit chamber, the shadows reaching out to enfold you as you cross the threshold, and you settle back onto your mat, the flame still burning, the papyrus still waiting, the long, slow afternoon drawing toward its quiet close. The flow of tablets has stopped. This is a moment that arrives every afternoon without announcement, a quiet threshold that you cross without ceremony, and yet each time it comes, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the record's chamber, a deepening of the silence that tells you the active work of the day is complete. The doorway, which for hours has framed the coming and going of the chief official with his armloads of clay, now shows only the still, golden light of the late afternoon sun, the rectangle of illumination on the packed earth floor, undisturbed by any passing shadow. The courtyard beyond, which has been alive with the sounds of carts and oxen and the low voices of workers, has grown quiet, the unloading finished, the last grain sack poured into the last silo, the heavy wooden doors sealed with their cords and clay bully. What remains now is not the gathering of new information, but the careful, patient work of summation, the quiet verification that everything recorded on this day is true and complete and properly ordered. A task that requires not the steady hand of transcription, but the slow, methodical eye of review. You sit on your reed mat, your legs crossed and your back straight, and you allow yourself a long, slow breath, drawing the cool, still air of the chamber deep into your lungs and releasing it with a soft, measured exhale. The ache in your shoulders and neck, which has been your companion through the long afternoon, has settled into a deep, tired warmth, no longer demanding your attention, but simply present, a part of the day's accumulated weight that you carry with a quiet acceptance. The lamp on your table burns steadily, its flame a tall, unwavering spire of gold, and you take a moment to adjust the wick, drawing it a little further from the spout so that the light is at its brightest for the exacting work ahead. The new oil you added earlier still fills the bowl to its proper level, and the fresh wick draws the fuel upward with a clean, efficient burn, the flame burning without flicker or waver, a perfect, steady illumination that casts its warm circle across the tabletop and the waiting scrolls. You reach for your bundle of reed pens and select a fresh one, a reed with a very fine point that you have kept in reserve for this particular purpose, the tip cut at a sharper angle than the pens you use for writing, designed not for depositing ink, but for tracing, for pointing, for guiding the eye along the lines of text without marking them. You hold it up to the lamp, turning it slowly to inspect the cut, and you see that the point is perfect, a fine, sharp taper that will serve as an extension of your finger, a precise tool for the quiet work of verification. You set the fine-pointed pen on the pallet beside your writing pen, and then you turn your attention to the scrolls that cover your table, the Emma records and the Barley records and the Royal Spelt record, each one a separate ledger, each one filled with the neat black columns of your handwriting, the accumulated labor of the day laid out in ink and papyrus, waiting to be confirmed. The task before you is not counting, not in the sense of adding the numbers again from scratch. The dock officials have already done that work, and their tallies have been checked and rechecked before they ever reached your table. What you are doing now is something more subtle, more visual, a careful inspection of the physical record to ensure that no character has been broken or smudged, that no line has been drawn where it should not be, that no accidental mark of the pen has introduced an error into the permanent archive. You are looking at the records as objects, as physical things made of ink and fiber, and you are verifying their integrity, their wholeness, their fitness to be stored in the great archive, where they will remain for many years, consulted by future scribes and future officials who will need to know what was recorded on this day. It is a quiet, patient task, different from the active flow of writing, more like the slow, careful work of a craftsman examining the surface of a finished vessel, looking for any tiny flaw that might have escaped the eye during its making. You begin with the Emma scroll, the first ledger you started in the morning, and you draw it closer to you, shifting the riverstone paperweight so that it holds the upper portion flat while you examine the lower. The ink is completely dry now, the matte black characters standing out sharply against the pale cream background, and you can see the faint, subtle texture of the papyrus strips, the tiny horizontal and vertical lines that form the grid of the pressed reeds, a texture that catches the lamplight in a soft, muted pattern. You take the fine-pointed pen in your right hand, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers, and you begin your review at the top of the first column, where the date and the regnal year and the estate name mark the beginning of the day's work. Your lips move silently as you trace, forming the ancient words for the month of the inundation season, for the lunar day, for the regnal year, for the noble's estate in the northern nome, and you hear the sounds inside your head, a quiet, internal voice that speaks the hieratic signs into existence even though no sound passes your lips. The blunt end of the fine-pointed pen moves slowly down the column, tracing each character without touching the ink, hovering just above the surface, and your eyes follow the point, checking each stroke, each curve, each curve, each curve, each curve, each horizontal and vertical line, confirming that the ink is solid and unbroken, that no smudge has spread across the fibers, that no accidental dot or blot has marred the clean surface. The characters are as you left them, neat and precise and true, and you move on to the grain type symbol for a myrrh, the stylized stalk with its heavy, drooping head, and then to the long columns of Hecate signs that follow. The numbers are the heart of the record, the reason the scroll exists, and you give them your fullest attention, tracing each circle and line with the same slow, methodical care that you gave to writing them. The hundreds column is long, a dense forest of identical signs that stretches down the papyrus, and your eyes move steadily through it, checking each Hecate symbol for completeness, for consistency, for the proper spacing between the marks. The tens column is shorter, and you trace it more quickly, your pen moving in a smooth, continuous motion from top to bottom, your lips still forming the silent words for the measures of grain. The single units come last, the final handful of marks that complete the tally, and you check each one individually, your pen pausing on each circle, each line, before moving on. When you reach the bottom of the column, you trace the thin, horizontal separator line that you drew to mark the end of the entry, confirming that it is straight and unbroken, a clean boundary between one record and the next. The first entry is complete, and you move on to the temple records, the large shipment of emmer from the fields dedicated to the god Amun. The red ochre corrections on the original tablet are not visible on the papyrus, of course. You wrote the corrected figures directly, the adjusted numbers clean and accurate, and you check them now with particular attention, knowing that the temple's grain was the largest of the day and that any error here would be a significant one. Your pen traces the columns slowly, your eyes following the point with unwavering focus, and your lips form the words for the temple's name, the sacred signs for Amun, the list of specific fields along the floodplain, the long unbroken stream of numbers that represents hundreds and hundreds of sacks of emmer. The ink is perfect, the characters clear and distinct, the groupings properly separated, and you feel a quiet, steady satisfaction as you confirm that the record is whole and true. The lamp flame burns steadily above you, its light a warm golden presence that illuminates every detail of the scroll, and the silence in the chamber is profound, deeper now than it has been all day, the sounds of the courtyard having faded entirely as the workers have gone to their rest. You can hear the tiny, almost inaudible hiss of the flame consuming the oil, a sound so quiet that it exists at the very edge of your perception, and you can hear your own slow, even breathing, the soft rise and fall of your chest that accompanies the movement of your eyes down the columns of text. The air in the room is cool and still, heavy with the smell of dried ink and old papyrus and the faint, nutty scent of the lamp oil, and you feel wrapped in the quiet, enclosed in a small, private world of light and paper and patient, methodical work. You finish the emmer scroll and set it aside, lifting the river stone and moving it to the barley scroll, the separate ledger that you began in the middle of the day. The barley records are shorter and simpler, the contributions from the tenant villages and the minor officials, and you trace them with a slightly quicker pace, your pen moving down the columns with a smooth, steady rhythm, your eyes checking each character, each line, each separator, confirming that everything is as it should be. The village names are there, the signs for the acacia trees and the rocky hill and the junction of the canals, and you form the word silently, your lips shaping the ancient syllables with a quiet, meditative repetition. The numbers are modest, a few hundred hecates here, a few tens there, and they are all accounted for. The ink clean and unbroken, the columns properly aligned, the record complete. The royal spelt scroll is the last, and you treat it with the same careful reverence that you gave to its writing, your fine-pointed pen tracing the larger, more elegant characters with a slow, deliberate motion. The cartouche that encloses the king's name is perfectly formed, the oval ring unbroken, the sacred syllables inside it clear and distinct, and you trace the curve with a particular care, your pen following the smooth, sweeping line from its beginning to its end, confirming that no gap or smudge mars its perfection. the spelt symbol. That unfamiliar stalk with its broad, flat head and its horizontal husk lines is clean and precise, and the columns of numbers are as neat and orderly as any you have written today. The Hecate signs formed with the larger, more formal hand that the royal record demanded. You reach the bottom of the column, tracing the final separator line, and then you set the fine-pointed pen down on the palette with a soft click, the review complete. Now you pause, your hands resting loosely on your thighs, and you let your gaze drift across the three scrolls, the emma and the barley and the spelt, the day's work made visible, a full and complete record of the grain taxes that arrived at the granary from dawn until late afternoon. The papyrus surfaces glow warmly in the lamplight, the black ink characters standing out against the cream background with a sharp, clear contrast, and you see that everything is in order. No broken characters, no accidental blots, no lines drawn where they should not be, the columns properly separated, the groupings clearly marked, the handwriting consistent and legible throughout. The day's record is a complete, unified whole, a testament to a day of patient, silent labor under a single unwavering flame. You allow yourself a moment of quiet stillness, sitting on your reed mat with your back straight and your breathing slow and even, your eyes resting on the lamp flame as it burns. The flame is shorter now than it was when you replaced the wick, the oil level in the bowl having dropped a little more, and you know that the lamp has been burning for many hours, its fuel slowly consumed by the same steady, patient process that has consumed your own energy, your own attention, your own quiet dedication to the task. The flame does not hurry, it simply burns, transforming oil into light, just as you have transformed play tallies into papyrus records, a quiet, unremarkable transformation that will be repeated tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, as long as the granary stands and the river floods and the grain grows in the fields along the floodplain. You lean forward and gather the three scrolls, the emma and the barley and the spelt, rolling each one carefully with slow, even pressure, your fingers smoothing the papyrus as it curls into its familiar cylindrical shape. You tie each scroll with a linen cord, the same cords that held them when they were fresh and blank, and you tuck the loose ends under the wrappings to secure them. Then you rise from your mat, your body moving slowly, the stiffness in your knees and hips and shoulders making itself known, and you carry the scrolls to the wooden shelves against the right wall, where the archives of the granary are stored. You find the proper place for each one, the emma records on one shelf, the barley on another, the royal spelt on a higher shelf reserved for documents of particular importance, and you slide them into their places with a gentle, careful pressure, the rolled papyrus fitting snugly between the scrolls of previous days and previous seasons. The archives grow by small increments, day by day, scroll by scroll, and today's work will join the long, quiet accumulation of records that stretches back for many years. A vast, silent library of grain taxes and harvest tallies, and the slow, steady accounting of the kingdom's wealth. The great wooden door of the records chamber stands open, and through it you can see the courtyard beyond, where the late afternoon sun has begun its final descent toward the western horizon, the golden light now carrying a deep, honeyed warmth that speaks of the approaching evening. The shadows that stretch across the gravel are long and soft, their edges blurred by the slight haze that rises from the cooling stones, and the tops of the great silos glow with a pale amber radiance, their conical forms catching the last full light of the day. You have just returned from the shelves where the three scrolls now rest, the emma and the barley and the royal spelt, each one tied with its linen cord and stored in its proper place among the archives, the day's work complete and whole and ready for the long silence of the years to come. Now you stand beside your low wooden table, looking down at the tools of your trade, the palette and the pens and the lamp and the ink, and you prepare yourself for the final task of the day, the quiet, methodical work of putting everything away. The lamp still burns on the table, its flame a little shorter now than it was during the afternoon, the oil level in the bowl having dropped to a shallow pool that barely covers the base of the wick. The fire has been your companion since before dawn, a steady, unwavering presence that has illuminated every character you have written, every column you have traced, every quiet moment of the long day, and you look at it now with a calm, quiet gratitude, the way one might look at a faithful animal that has worked beside you without complaint. The flame dances slightly, a tiny, wavering motion that makes the shadows on the walls shift, and then it steadies again, its yellow spire standing tall and bright against the deepening gloom of the chamber. Soon you will extinguish it, but not yet. First, there are other things to attend to. The chief official appears in the doorway, his broad, heavy silhouette filling the golden rectangle of light, and he steps inside, without ducking this time, the lamplight catching the tired lines around his eyes and the slight stoop of his shoulders, the physical evidence of his own long day among the silos and the carts and the tally sticks. He carries no tablets now, his hands are empty, and he holds them loosely at his sides as he crosses the small room to stand beside your table. He looks at the palette, at the scrolls no longer present, at the lamp still burning, and then he looks at you, his tired eyes meeting yours with a calm, steady gaze. He nods once, a slow, heavy dip of his chin, and he speaks a few words in his low, unhurried voice, telling you that the day's records are complete and that the chamber must be sealed for the night. You nod in return, the same slow, measured dip of your head that has marked the end of every transaction between you, and the official turns and walks back toward the doorway, his footsteps slow and heavy on the packed earth floor, pausing at the threshold to wait for you to finish your final duties. You turn back to the table and begin the methodical work of cleaning your tools, a process that you have performed at the end of every working day for as long as you have been a scribe. The reed pen you have been using all day rests in its groove on the wooden pallet, its angled tip still dark with the residue of the ink paste, and you pick it up and hold it carefully between your thumb and forefinger. From the fold of your linen kilt, you take the small scrap of cloth that you keep for this purpose, a square of coarse, undyed linen that has been used many times and bears the faded stains of old ink, and you wipe the tip of the pen with a slow, careful motion, drawing the cloth from the base of the cut to the fine point, removing every trace of the black paste. The ink comes away easily, still slightly moist, and it leaves a dark, smudged streak on the linen, a small, abstract mark that will join the many others already there. You inspect the tip in the lamplight, turning it slowly to check that no residue remains, and when you are satisfied, you place the cleaned pen back into the bundle with the others, its sharp, angled tip aligned with the rest. The palette requires attention next, and you lift it from the table with both hands, holding it over the small scrap of linen to catch any drips. The groove where the ink paste has sat all day still holds a small amount of the black mixture, the surface of it slightly thickened and dulled from exposure to the warm, dry air of the lamp. You take the clay water flask and pour a few drops onto the dried ink, watching as the water beads up and then spreads, soaking into the hardened paste and beginning to soften it. You use the blunt end of a spare reed to work the water into the ink, stirring in slow, small circles, loosening the paste from the wood until it forms a thin, watery sludge that you can wipe away with the linen cloth. You clean the groove carefully, wiping it several times until the wood is bare and smooth, the pale honey color of the acacia showing through without any dark stains. The red ochre depression is still mostly clean, only a faint, dusty trace of rust-colored powder remaining, and you wipe that away as well with a dry corner of the cloth. The palette is now clean and ready for the next day, and you set it down on the table, the wood gleaming softly in the lamplight. The ink cake itself, the hard black lump of carbon and gum that has provided the day's writing material, is now smaller than it was at dawn, a portion of its mass having been dissolved and transferred to the papyrus scrolls, and you leave it in its depression on the palette to dry completely in the night air. By morning, it will be hard and brittle again, ready to be remoistened and mixed into fresh paste. The water flask you stopper with its rolled linen plug, pressing it firmly into the narrow neck, and you set it aside on the table to be refilled from the household jar when you return home. Now only the lamp remains. It sits on the table before you, the small pottery bowl with its pinched spout and its oil-darkened interior, the flame still burning with its steady golden light, the wick a glowing ember at the heart of the fire. You reach toward it slowly, feeling the warmth of the bowl on your fingertips as they draw near, and you take hold of the lamp with both hands, lifting it carefully from the table, the oil sloshing gently against the sides. The flame wavers slightly with the motion, stretching and contracting, and then it steadies again as you hold the lamp at the level of your chest, the light casting your face in a warm golden glow and throwing your shadow huge and dark against the wall behind you. You look at the flame for a long moment, watching it dance and flicker, the yellow spire rising from the oil-soaked wick, the blue shimmer at its base, the tiny, almost invisible trail of white smoke that curls upward from its tip and vanishes into the darkness of the ceiling. This flame has been your companion through the entire day, from the cool dark hours of pre-dawn when you first lit it with a splint from the courtyard brazier, through the long morning of tallies and the midday barley records and the careful, reverent writing of the royals spelt, through the quiet afternoon of verification and summation, and now it has reached the end of its service, its fuel nearly spent, its purpose complete. You feel a quiet, solemn sense of closure. Not sadness, but a calm, complete acknowledgement of the day's work and the role the lamp has played in it, and then you purse your lips and blow gently across the top of the bowl. The flame stretches sideways, a long, thin ribbon of fire that bends away from your breath, fluttering and dancing as the air current strikes it, the blue base separating from the wick and vanishing first, the yellow body stretching thinner and thinner until it is barely more than a ghost of light. And then, with a soft final flicker, it is gone. The flame extinguishes itself in silence, leaving behind only a thin, curling ribbon of white smoke that rises from the glowing tip of the wick, twisting and spiraling upward toward the ceiling, growing thinner and more diffuse until it merges with the darkness and disappears. The room falls into absolute blackness, the kind of dark that is complete and total, with no source of light anywhere, the doorway having been blocked by the chief official's broad silhouette as he waits for you to finish. You stand in the dark for a moment, holding the worn lamp in your hands, feeling the heat of the bowl against your palms, smelling the faint acrid scent of the extinguished wick, and then you move toward the doorway, your feet finding the familiar path across the packed earth floor without the need for sight. The official steps aside as you emerge into the courtyard, and the evening light, though softened and golden, seems almost blinding after the absolute darkness of the chamber. You blink several times, your eyes adjusting, and you look around at the quiet, empty space. The gravel pale and grey in the fading light, the silos standing like silent ancient guardians against the deepening sky. The official reaches up and takes hold of the heavy acacia door, swinging it closed with a slow, steady pressure, the leather hinges creaking softly as the wood meets the frame. He takes a length of cord from a niche beside the door and threads it through the wooden lock mechanism, pulling it tight, and then he produces a small lump of moist clay from a pouch at his waist, pressing it over the cord and the lock to form a smooth, round seal. From another pouch he takes the granaries' official seal, a small cylinder of carved stone, and he presses it into the clay with a firm, even pressure, leaving behind the distinctive mark of the granary, the stylized image of a grain stalk and a hecat measure, the symbols of the institution that has stood on this spot for generations. The clay will dry overnight, and in the morning the seal will be broken by the first official to arrive, a simple, ancient system of security that has protected the kingdom's grain records for centuries. The official straightens and turns to you, nodding once more, his tired eyes holding a calm, quiet warmth, and then he turns and walks away across the courtyard, his footsteps crunching softly on the gravel, heading toward his own home somewhere beyond the walls. You are alone now, standing in the empty courtyard with the darkening sky above you and the first cool breath of evening touching your face, and you gather your scribal kit, the palette and the pens and the water flask, wrapping them in the linen cloth as you did in the morning, the bundle settling into your palm with its familiar weight. You walk across the courtyard toward the main gate, your sandals making a soft, dry sound on the gravel, and you pass between the two stone posts where the guard stood in the early morning darkness. The guard is still there, a different man now, the night watchman who will sit by the gate until dawn, a small oil lamp of his own burning on the ledge beside him. He nods to you as he pass, a sleepy, casual acknowledgement, and you return the nod without breaking stride, stepping through the gateway and onto the track that leads back toward the city. The world outside the granary walls has transformed while you were inside. The sun has dropped below the western horizon, and the sky above you is a deep, luminous indigo, the color of the river at twilight, with the first stars already visible as small, bright points of white light scattered across the vast dome. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of the river and the distant smell of wood smoke from the cooking fires that are being lit in the houses of the city, a smell that speaks of evening meals and the quiet, domestic routines that mark the end of the working day. The palm trees along the riverbank stand in silhouette against the fading light, their fronds motionless in the still air, and the river itself is a broad, dark ribbon that glints faintly with the last reflected light of the sky, its surface smooth and slow and silent. You walk along the track that parallels the river, the same path you followed in the pre-dawn darkness, and your feet find the familiar rhythm automatically, a slow, steady pace that carries you homeward without hurry. The low wall of the temple estate runs beside you on your right, its mud brick surface now a soft, muted grey in the twilight, the cracks and fissures that were sharp and distinct in the morning light now blurred by the gathering dark. The stubble of the harvested barley field on your left stretches away toward the river, the pale stalks catching the last light of the sky and glowing with a faint, silvery sheen. The sounds of the evening are different from the sounds of the morning. Where the morning was silent and still, the evening is alive with the quiet, peaceful noises of a city settling in for the night. You hear the distant bark of a dog, the low murmur of voices from the houses you pass, the clink of a cooking pot, the soft, rhythmic thud of a grinding stone as someone prepares flour for the evening bread, and all of these sounds blend together into a calm, soothing tapestry that wraps around you as you walk. The streets of the city are dim and quiet when you reach them, the narrow avenues between the mud brick houses lit only by the faint glow of oil lamps that burn in the doorways and the occasional cooking fire that casts a warm orange flicker against a wall. The bakery that was dark and silent in the morning now has a small lamp burning beside its domed oven, and the smell of fresh bread drifts out into the street, a rich, warm scent that makes your stomach stir with a quiet hunger. The sandal maker's workshop is closed, the strips of leather and papyrus taken down from the line, and the street stretches ahead of you, the familiar path that leads to your own home, your own doorway, your own reed mat, and the family that waits within. You arrive at your house as the last light fades from the sky, the indigo deepening to a dark velvety blue that will soon be scattered with thousands of stars. The doorway is lit by a small lamp that burns on a ledge inside, a welcoming glow that spills out into the street and guides your feet the last few steps. You pull aside the reed mat that covers the entrance and step inside, the familiar smell of your home wrapping around you, the scent of bread and emmer flour, and the faint, dusty smell of the mud brick walls. Your family is there, moving quietly in the lamplight, preparing the evening meal, and they look up as you enter, greeting you with soft voices and calm, familiar eyes. You set your scribble kit on the low shelf where it belongs, the palette and the pens and the water flask returning to their resting place, and you slip off your sandals, feeling the cool, smooth, packed earth of the floor beneath your bare feet. The day is over. The grain has been recorded, the scroll stored, the lamp extinguished, and the records chamber sealed with its cord and clay. The kingdom's accounts are complete and accurate, a small, perfect contribution to the vast, ancient machinery of the granary, and you have played your part with patience and care and quiet, unassuming dedication. You sit down on the reed mat in the main room of your house, your back against the cool, mud brick wall, and you accept the simple meal that is offered to you, the bread and the beer and the small portion of dried fish, the food tasting rich and satisfying after the long day of work. The lamplight in your home is soft and golden, smaller and dimmer than the lamp in the records chamber, and it casts gentle flickering shadows on the walls as your family moves around you, speaking in low, unhurried voices about the small events of their own days, the weaving and the baking and the drawing of water from the river. You listen with a quiet, tired contentment, your body heavy with the accumulated fatigue of the day, your mind calm and still, And when the meal is finished and the lamp is turned down low, you lie down on your reed mat, the same mat you rose from in the dark hours of the morning, and you close your eyes. The sounds of the night drift in through the open doorway, the distant lapping of the river, the soft rustle of the palm fronds, the quiet, rhythmic chirping of the crickets, and you let them carry you down into a deep, dreamless sleep, the same sleep that will wrap around the granary and the silos and the river and the fields, the same sleep that will hold the whole quiet world until the first light of dawn.